phone and get some of the. Let's put off the approval of the minutes till we get the full quorum on, and we can move from there. So I want to welcome everyone to the call. This is a interesting challenge to try to do this all virtually, but as a STEM council, we thought let's push technology and see how it works. And as we think about a broader council and the fact that people are across the state, we want coverage across the state. This might be the new norm as we try to include people and try to make technology work in our best interest. So we'll make this give this a try. We'll learn from it, and we'll see how it works and see how effective we can be at coordinating a conversation on some very important topics. So the agenda's been sent out. I'm going to turn over to Mark just to give a quick update, and then we're going to turn over to Lindsay Capps to kind of give us an update on what's going on in the Chief Education.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. I think I'll wait regarding and give comments during the approval of the minutes.
Okay.
So, Lindsay, would you like to jump in at this point?
Happy to. Thank you. It's good to be with everybody this morning. Between Mark and I, you can determine whether his ceiling is better painted than mine. But to try this new technology, I would agree with Jim that this is a great way to connect across the state, and appreciate everybody's participation today. So I guess my focus in providing a report this morning is really around three key things. First is just to give the council sort of an overview of the governor's recommended budget for education. The second piece is to talk a little bit about the process within that context for Measure 98. And then the last piece, given the great facilitation and leadership of the STEM Council in developing our statewide STEM education plan, just to talk a little bit about the work ahead that we envision as we think about ways of taking elements of that plan and beginning some focused work across agencies and frankly across regions and communities of the state to make sure that vision is realized. And in that vein, I'm very excited to be joined today by our Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, who I know in our earlier fall meeting when I had the opportunity to present, we had talked about hear from Dr. Noor about some of the work of the department, and certainly he will be helping to frame out as well some of the work around Measure 98 as well. So with that, I just want to begin by talking a little bit about the governor's budget. And I think, as all of you are aware, we are facing a $1.7 billion shortfall, which has, I think, put the governor in the position of trying as best she can through difficult decisions to preserve some key priorities. She's outlined, as she released that budget, a key frame for her, which is how we do more to protect vulnerable children and families and move more Oregon families out of poverty. And that was an important principle and priority as she put together her unified statewide budget. She also talked about the importance of maintaining a seamless system of education so that we are ensuring that students have opportunities across the learning continuum, beginning in early childhood education through higher education, to have better access and opportunity to the learning opportunities and pathways of learning that they need. And so in that regard, as she looked at the education budget, she held harmless our early learning and early childhood programs that are critical not only to students but in supporting families. She held our K-12 school budget to current service level, and she maintained what were fairly historic reinvestments in our higher education system, not only our community colleges but public universities, by keeping our 2015 investments intact. This is a good opportunity, I think, through the budget to provide some stability, but we also have opportunities, as the governor outlined, to do more to ensure that our students are ready to learn, that they're on track, and that they're ultimately prepared for their future. And first and foremost, in that effort is our sort of collective energy and initiative to improve high school graduation outcomes in the state, especially for our traditionally underserved and low-income students. And in that vein, she outlined a couple of key priorities. As I mentioned earlier, a focus on early learning. Secondarily, a focus on replicating what works. I'm pleased to be joined by our Education Innovation Officer, who serves in the Chief Education Office, who's been given the charge to put a spotlight on this work, working with communities and schools to identify and replicate best practices that will help us achieve those outcomes quicker. And in that vein, we have established some resources within the State School Fund for a graduation equity fund, and with some specific areas of focus that I know Colt will speak to later on in the meeting. The third piece that the governor outlined in terms of improving graduation was investing in excellent teaching. And we have been doing some work through the Council for Educator Advancement to figure out how we provide more universal access of educators to high quality, culturally responsive professional learning and leadership development opportunities. And I think there'll be a good opportunity for us to come back and talk more to the Council about that. But as you think about efforts to improve supports through our STEM hubs and other means for those educators who are providing not only STEAM education but career and technical education, we see the work of the Council as being aligned to that. And our efforts to try to regionalize some of these supports, I think, align well with the work of the STEM hubs that are already underway in support of our educators. The fourth principle the governor outlined around high school graduation is a key topic we'll talk about today, and I'm glad to be joined by proponents of Measure 98, Toya and Tim and others, who will talk a little bit about that act. The governor is very much supportive of that work and sees that as critically aligned to overall strategies to improve high school graduation outcomes. We have not fully funded the measure, I think, as many of you know, in part because of the need to maintain investment across our seamless system of education. But we are looking to work collaboratively not only with proponents but other stakeholders to ensure that we implement Measure 98 in a manner that allows us to move forward in achieving the outcomes that is outlined, and certainly to expand access to career technical education, advanced coursework in high school, as well as other dropout prevention strategies. And so I know we will be talking more about what that looks like today. But in that vein, we also have highlighted the importance of, beyond the Measure 98 funding to K-12 schools, maintaining our investments in regional structures, not only in our CTE coordinators across the state, but certainly our STEM hubs as critical elements in creating the infrastructure to support the implementation of 98 and to expand pathways of learning in STEAM and CTE that extend from K-12 into the higher education system. I think that's an important opportunity for this council to be helping us think about as we go forward. The last principle the governor outlined was access and affordability to post-secondary education. So the governor has recommended that we fully extend the Oregon Promise program and expand opportunities through the Oregon Opportunity Grant, our need-based student aid program, so that we will serve just about 85,000 students in the coming biennium in helping them to access and complete a college degree at a community college or university here in our state. And that, of course, is very well aligned to our notion of creating these pathways of applied learning from K-12 to the higher education system. That access will be critical. So with that, why don't I go ahead and turn my attention a little bit to the Measure 98 process, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about as we hear from that panel. But as you all are aware, we are working in a couple of ways around our implementation of the measure. First and foremost, and I think Dr. Noor can speak to this, we are going through a process of developing rules to implement the law that was passed by the voters. But we're also engaged in some interagency conversation as we think about implementation of that measure, to identify opportunities where we might leverage both regional partnership and connectivity between the K-12 and post-secondary system. And so those are, I think, are friendly efforts intended to support the reach of Measure 98 and to certainly make sure that as we implement this, that we're building capacity and, most importantly, ensuring equity as that measure is put into practice across schools and districts throughout the state. STEM plan. So I want to thank, again, the Council for your inspired work. I want to thank the STEM Policy Director, Mark, for his efforts to help guide that process, and the number of partners and communities that helped to inform the ultimate plan that you all adopted and we released just earlier this month. One of the key things that I think we're looking at in regard to the broad vision outlined in that plan and the key priorities is how we can continue to advance some specific areas of priority that you all have outlined within the plan, not only in thinking about efforts that agencies of the state need to undertake, but how we are supporting regional partnerships such as our STEM hubs in thinking through their role. And then lastly, but probably most importantly, how we're thinking together with not only K-12 schools, but our higher education institutions about the roles that they play in that work. I want to highlight, I think, one critical piece that we can certainly be thinking about, and that is the Every Student Succeeds Act and opportunities within that process as the Oregon Department of Education is developing its plan to think about things like after-school program opportunities, to think about ways in which we can integrate CTE and STEAM more effectively within our primary and secondary level educational opportunities for students. And I think certainly, and as I mentioned, the Council for Educator Advancement earlier, to think about ways in which we are continuing to support high-quality professional learning. Those are just a few of the, I think, near-term opportunities that we have. I think one of the longer-term efforts that we have to get after urgently that you all have articulated is certainly ways in which we are expanding, most especially STEAM opportunities, to communities of color and to other underserved students across this state. That came out clear in the report that was developed, and I think that's an area for us to be thinking about across the system and at all levels of the system. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions that you might have, but again, I want to thank you for the engagement today, the participation of everybody getting on this webinar, and I look forward to the conversation as we engage over the next couple hours.
Thanks, Lindsay. Do any council members have questions for Lindsay? I think we have 5.
I do. This is Eric.
Hi, Eric. Go ahead.
Hey. Hi, Lindsay. This is Eric Meslow. Quick question.
Eric.
I know the governor favors the term STEAM. We've had lots of conversations around that topic. It would be extraordinarily helpful for the council members if you were to define that from the governor's office, on what the A actually stands for in the governor's mind, so that we don't get crosswise with her.
Well, I think you see it not only in the governor's framing of STEAM education, but you certainly see it within the new federal ESSA law. And I think there's an opportunity for us to be thinking in ways in which we're integrating art and creative design into this work. I think it's important to reinforce, and I think you all have had this conversation at the council level, that some of what we're talking about is the way in which we engage in learning, whether that be project-based learning or other applied and experiential opportunities. I think there are ways to think in interdisciplinary ways in that regard that bring in other content areas. But let me also be really clear, Eric, to your question. The statutory goals of the council remain clear, and our focus is really around how we're improving math proficiency certainly at the K-12 level and at the higher education level, and moving toward completion of degrees within STEM or STEAM fields. So I think it's important for us to know that focus continues, but we need to be thinking about ways in which we can take an interdisciplinary approach, so that I think most importantly, we're engaging students, and that's the important thing here. We need to provide opportunities that bring them into STEAM and career and technical education that are accessible and allow for them to find ways to individualize those courses of study.
Follow-up question. I concur with you, Lindsay, and I think folks that are tight within the council would agree 100% with what you just said. The concern I have is that we're about to go into legislative session where that definition is not as clearly known and realized, and I think we're going to get ourselves extraordinarily crosswise with this conversation if we do not have some level of leadership in regards to what that A stands for and what specifically that A does not stand for.
And I think I'll defer a little bit to Mark as our policy director in this realm to think about how we can articulate that, and perhaps that's an opportunity for us to come back to the council and talk more with you about what that definition looks like.
Thank you.
Any other questions for members of the council? Okay, hearing none. Thanks for the update, Lindsay. Obviously, big challenges ahead as we try to make this all work in the next budget cycle, and obviously more conversations to have as the legislature puts their budget proposal together and continues to figure out where we put the state's resources to get the most value for our students. So I appreciate the update, and we'll continue to work with you on clarifying what the STEM kind of distinction is so that we're all kind of going the same direction. Next item, let's go ahead. Thanks, Lindsay. Let's go ahead and do Dr. Noor, and then we'll come back. And now that we have a full council quorum, we'll then get approved the minutes. But I'd like to hear from Salam Noor for next, and then we'll go on to the first part of the agenda. So Salam, welcome.
Thank you. I had to get off mute here for a second. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning and to share some information and to participate on this panel relative to Measure 98 and the opportunity that it affords us. I really appreciated Lindsay's framing, and I have to say before I jump into my quick update, and it's going to be a very high-level update regarding some items that would be of interest to you, that I think it's really important to clarify the A in the STEAM. And that is something that we delved into deeply at the local level to really have an understanding of how the arts aspect of it helps further and advance career pathways and opportunities for students in the STEM field. So I'm delighted that you have an interest in clarifying what that actually means. So by way of updates in the brief time that I have, I just want to touch on a few things. First, I want to compliment you on the STEM plan and really congratulate you on a very well thought out, comprehensive set of priorities that really fits with the mission and the goals that were established for the council and align really well to the work that we do here in the agency and the work that many of the other partners do in the field to help advance STEM careers and pathways and education in our schools and colleges and other places around the state. So as I look at the STEM plan, I can't help but think about the strategic planning that the State Board of Education is currently engaged in. The State Board's plan has not really been updated since 2007, and I actually worked on it when I was here at the department back in 2007. So we're engaged with the board in a process to help develop their vision and their goals and priorities for the next 3, 4, at least the next 3 years. And I will tell you that 2 of the areas that they're very much focused on are graduation and equity. And as you unpack that, you will see a lot of alignment and a lot of consistency, if you will, with the goals and priorities that you've established as a council. So I look forward to continuing to look for opportunities to align, potentially have some conversations between the State Board and the council relative to some of these priorities and how we can work together on them. But graduation and leading to graduation and the investments that Lindsay talked about are an integral part of that. and equity, and that is something that we will touch on under Measure 98, and I know that is something that the Council is interested in, are also part of the board's priority. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, it's more of a technical update, if you will, but we're very excited about it, and we're excited about the opportunities that it affords us, is another phase of reorganization that we've gone through here as an agency. So we took the Office of Assessment and Accountability and divided it into two sections. The assessment part will actually be, it is part of our Office of Teaching and Learning. So this gives us an opportunity to look at assessment holistically, to look at assessment as it pertains to all subject areas and not just math and reading. So we look at it from an applied assessment, performance assessment, other types of assessments that are really integral to the teaching and learning process. I'm excited about that because the STEM work can and should be tied into the assessment frameworks that we develop as a state. And also the CTE work should be part of the assessment thinking and frameworks that we develop as a state. So I think that affords us an opportunity to think about the teaching and learning process in a very holistic way and to make assessment part of instruction rather than something separate that's only part of accountability. Our accountability team will actually be folded into a new office that's called the Office of Accountability, Research, and Information Services, where we took IT, our Office for Research, and our Office for Accountability, and they've been folded into a single office. And that's going to improve the information that we provide, the way we look at that information, the way we organize it, the way we make it accessible. So I think it's going to afford us some opportunities that will help further, in my opinion, the goals that you have, the goals that the State Board have, higher ed, et cetera, because it's looking at things more holistically rather than for a single purpose like assessment for accountability. Now we're looking at assessment for instruction, learning, for teaching. The third item I want to touch on very quickly is our the Every Student Succeeds Act work that we have been doing around the state. We've completed 13, we did 13 community forums last spring, and we're in the process of doing some additional community forums. And now we're circling back with communities and basically saying to them, this is what we heard from you, this is where we're headed. We had 4 work groups that focused on accountability, assessment, school improvement, and educator effectiveness that have completed their work. We have an advisory committee that's looking at that work and reviewing it. And we have a lot of coherence relative to the goals that you've established, the goals that we have for the department. I believe the goals that we have for the state in terms of what's really important. But our ESSA work really has 4 key components that I think are really important to underscore. One is the commitment to quality instruction and quality teaching and learning, which is the content standards in all subject areas. We're looking at comprehensive and balanced assessment systems across the state that really inform learning yet maintain the accountability requirements by the law. We're also looking at more meaningful accountability systems. So instead of a single indicator that determines the quality of the school, we're looking at a dashboard model that provides a lot of information. I can see the CTE and STEM information folded into that, either from a state perspective or a local perspective. And we're looking at systems to continue to support administrator and teacher leadership. And on the administrator part, the emphasis is really on cultural proficiency, cultural responsiveness, and the idea is to build their capacity in order to create a culture at the school and district level that's conducive for that. On the teacher side, it's to provide pathways for teachers to engage in leadership activities without necessarily becoming an administrator. We have a lot of teachers that want to get involved, they want to lead, they want to work with the community and the school, but they're not interested in becoming an administrator. And lastly, Measure 98, and we're going to talk about that more so in the panel, but I want to underscore what Lindsay said, that in addition to rulemaking, which is a technical function, we're looking at this from a policy framework, we're looking at this from a systematic and sustainable approach to ensuring students have access to opportunities that will increase graduation rates and improve outcomes for all students, and most importantly, really prepare them to make informed decisions about that next step in their life. And it could be going to college, going directly to the workforce, and that we are responsive and providing them a learning experience that really meets their needs and not one that meets the adults' needs, if you will, in the system. So we have lots of exciting work underway. These are just some highlights that I thought would be of interest to you. And I will stop here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share these with you, and be happy to come back and get into more details relative to these and any other item. And I'm happy to take any questions right now if you have them. Thank you.
Thanks, Salam. Do any members of the council have questions for Dr. Noor?
Jim, this is Thompson. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was curious about where we stood in the state in terms of implementation of proficiency grading in each of our school districts. What's our current process?
Good morning. The proficiency grading is an existing policy within the graduation requirements. This is something that we worked on back in 2007, and there is a provision for it. The law changed a little bit, I believe, in 2011, but it didn't say you cannot do proficiency grading. It just basically said you have to engage your association and make sure that they're on board before you decide to adopt it as a policy. So from a policy perspective, we actually have a proficiency-based diploma. It is something that's in policy. It's been in policy for almost 10 years now. The implementation varies dramatically at the local level, and I can tell you when I was in Salem-Keizer, we actually pursued a district-wide framework for proficiency grading, and we made tremendous progress. However, at the end of the process, even teachers who are committed to this and were extremely excited about it started to get nervous because they felt that they would be one of the few schools and districts in the state, and perhaps in the country, that would be doing proficiency grading, and they could potentially disadvantage their students and keep them from earning scholarships because not everybody's doing it, and we don't have systems at the higher ed level that supports it. And out of the state of Oregon, it was really questionable as to how many universities and colleges would accept it. So from a policy perspective, it's there, it's in place. From a practice perspective, I think it varies dramatically from place to place, and we need to continue to do capacity building and training for it. We've worked with the Business Education Compact, Tamara Bush Johnson, and sadly Diane Smith, who passed away recently, to help promote that and provide some training across the state. But ultimately, it's really the district that have to make that decision and pursue it, and we've encouraged them to do so.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions from the council members? Dr. Noor, I have one question. It's Jim Pyro. The council is making investments in innovative programs, math in real life, adaptive math, digital literacy, programs that do potentially show promise, but they're done at a very small scale. To the extent these programs demonstrate success and the outcomes we're looking for, what are your thoughts on how we bring those to scale across the state, and how does that happen from your perspective?
Good morning, Jim. Thank you for the question. I would recommend a multi-pronged approach. Ultimately, in order to sustain something, there has to be a local investment for it. So once these programs are up and running and we can point to specific, once the programs, I'm getting some background noise, but let me try again. I think these, and you're going to hear about these programs from Tom Thompson, I believe, today. I think we have to highlight and showcase the success of these programs. We intend to disseminate information via policy briefs, via research briefs, and training that we provide to schools and districts. I think that's one way to help build capacity for these programs, is to create awareness, to create familiarity, to have people come and see what they look like and the results that we're getting from them. I think there will be a need for additional state investments ultimately. We can talk about Measure 98 and how Measure 98 potentially can support some of these programs if it's appropriate and within the intent and the spirit of the law. We will encourage folks to use their federal funds and other resources to help sustain, to implement some of these programs. I think the key is sustainability, is how do you scale up and sustain them over time. And there may be a need for some additional state investments at some point when the fiscal climate is appropriate. But I think, in my opinion, Jim, the key here is to focus, to highlight and recognize and celebrate the practice and get the practitioners, whether it's superintendents, principals, or educators, to see this and to recognize the success that's coming from it, and then build capacity for it to happen in various places around the state.
Thank you. Thank you. Great idea, and I think that's a good way to go. Show the carrot as opposed to use the stick, I think, is what we were suggesting. Okay, any other questions from the council members before we move on to the panel? Okay, thank you, Dr. Noor. I think you'll continue sitting with us on this panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Colt to lead a discussion on Measure 98, which is a measure that was passed in the last election, and it has to deal with improving high school graduation outcomes. And I'll turn it over to Colt to lead the panel discussion. So, Colt, you're up.
Thank you. Wait, so is the presentation showing, Mark?
Yes,
It's shown on mine.
Yep.
Okay. Doesn't show on mine. So. All right. Thanks very much for the time this morning on Measure 98. I'm excited to introduce our panelists this morning. We do have Dr. Noor, Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, talk more about Measure 98. We also have Toya Fick and Tim Nesbitt from Stand for Children, and I'll let everybody introduce themselves once again when we get rolling with the questions. And Brian Craig, who is with the Sheet Metal Contractors Association and serves on the CTE Revitalization Advisory Committee. So I think that they'll be able to present some great information and take some time for questions from panel members as well. So I think, as both Lindsay and Salam pointed out, the governor, the Chief Education Office, ODE, we're all pretty excited and hopeful for the opportunities brought forward by Measure 98. The measure, for me, aligns very tightly with the charge of my position, so that's a nice alignment, and I think also to hopes and dreams of many of our students. So I'm going to just share a couple of these. I went over and robbed from the Oregon School Boards Association a few pictures from their campaign, The Promise of Oregon, as they've gone around the state and visited with a number of students across Oregon to hear about what they want to do when they grow up and what they're hoping for from their schools. And I think they align both to what the STEM Council tries to afford across the state of Oregon, and also to what Measure 98 may make more possible for some of our students. So we have Owen here, who wants to be a scientist and help cure cancer. And Abigail, who's invested in her community and wants to be a criminal defense lawyer. And Gabriela, who learned to love medicine from mi abuela, her grandmother. With hard work, she hopes to someday become a cardiologist. So what we're hoping to do is open more pathways for students like these in Oregon. Our governor has, I think all of you probably know, set a vision that every Oregon student graduates with a plan for their future. Also has clearly prioritized this goal or this vision in the recommended budget as well. I think it's really critical as we take a look at what our current graduation outcomes are in Oregon. Right now, the national average for graduation outcomes are 83.2% of on-time graduation rate, which went up almost a percentage point this last year. Oregon's also went up by a couple of percentage points this last time around, but our ranking actually fell to third worst in the nation at 73.8%. When you take a look at what this means within the state, we had in 2015 11,826 of our students who, at the end of 12th grade, 13 years in our system, didn't have what was needed to graduate on time. So either enough credits or being able to demonstrate essential skills or some other requirement kept them from graduating on time. Now, some of these students did go on to graduate over the summer or over the next school year as a fifth-year graduate, and others earned a GED, but many of them are still out there with their opportunities fairly limited because they were not able to earn that diploma within our system. This number is not a new number, so this has been going on for some time in Oregon. We have about 12,000 students at each grade level in Oregon right now that are not on track for graduation. So I've been capturing that as about 150,000 reasons that we need to change some of our practices to ensure that we're serving all of our students. These 11,826 students are disproportionately students with disabilities, students of color, students navigating poverty, students living in tribal communities, and male students, boys. So here are the outcomes for those groups of students. Overall in Oregon, it's 26% of our students that don't graduate on time. When you look at this slide, you'll see that there are ranges for certain populations of students from 30% to 47% not graduating on time in Oregon. And it isn't as if Oregon or school districts have been standing still, so they've been aware of this. The legislature's been aware of this, the governor's clearly aware of this, and has prioritized a number of initiatives over the last few years, the last 5 years in particular, to try to curb this and provide some new opportunities for our students. And you'll find the STEM Investment Council itself listed there in 2012 as one of these initiatives. The latest of which is my position. So I'm just going to quickly share what that is, and then I'm going to bring the panel members on to share some information. So in my position, I am looking at a number of different things. So our state data, some research and reports, both local and national, promising practices that are going on in school districts across the state and elsewhere in the country, partner and educator perspectives, and looking at the work of previous groups, such as the Graduation Advisory Committee at the Oregon Department of Education that Salam Noor leads. So taking a look at all these different programs and what they have in place, what could be promising, what kind of barriers are being identified for our students, and then pulling that together around some community engagement that I went out and did in the summer and fall to come up with some short-term and long-term strategies, policy ideas to work in coordination with both Lindsay and Salam in preparing for the governor to consider for policy recommendations and budget recommendations as she moves forward this legislative session. I'm going to pause the slides there, and I don't know, Mark, if you want to bring back the pictures of folks or not, but I think as we start the conversation around ballot measure 98, it would be best to start with Toya and Tim, who are the major proponents behind the measure, and ask them if they could start by giving us a brief introduction to measure 98 and definitely share some of the critical elements of the measure.
Perfect. Can you guys hear me okay? I think I just unmuted. Awesome. So good morning, everybody. I'm Toya Fick, one of the chief petitioners of Measure 98 and the executive director of Stand for Children. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all this morning. Tim's going to give a little bit of an overview in a second, but I want to just say that we really have appreciated the framing of the conversations we've been having with everyone on the call, from Colt to Salam and Lindsay and others, and appreciate the governor's framing in her budget around Measure 98. It's important to note that this was not intended to be a carve-out of the state school fund, but additive to the state school fund, and really appreciate the attention put on all three pieces of the measure, which we'll talk about in a second. I think the only exception to the framing was around the funding and how much was provided in the budget and what the measure calls for, but we'll get to that in a minute. We think that Measure 98 aligns well with the work that's been happening at ODE, with the Chief Education Office, with the work that you all have been doing as a council. And again, this is meant to bring all that work to scale statewide. We really, spent the last couple of years working together, Tim and I, learning from you all and learning from the work that you've been doing on the ground with the revitalization grants and whatnot, and really want to bring that to every student in every high school across the state, because it absolutely makes a difference in terms of outcomes for our kids. So with that, Mark, I just wanted to let you know that we just sent you a note of the memo that Tim is about to go over, and if you have the chance to shoot it out to everyone on the call, that'd be great. But definitely not necessary right now, but otherwise I'll turn it over to Tim to walk through a couple of the key pieces of the measure.
Thanks, Toya. As Toya said, I want to provide a overview as to the intentions of the drafters and some of the most important details of the measure. But to begin with, Measure 98 provides supplemental funding for all of our high schools in the state. The dollars flow to the school districts, and they in turn have to apply those dollars to establishing or expanding programs in career technical education. And there we have the one qualifier that states relevant to the job market in the community or region the school district serves. College level educational opportunities, and there's a list in the measure that calls out advanced placement, IB, dual credit, co-enrollment programs, including the fifth-year programs that had been pioneered some years ago by some districts, and dropout prevention strategies such as activities to reduce chronic absenteeism, summer and after hours school programs, tutoring and counseling. And the intent is that all districts would be able to access these funds. This is not a competitive grant program, although it's characterized as a grant, because that's the terminology that's generally used for state funding of schools. But it's not a competitive process. Rather, it's a qualifying process where districts would submit 2-year plans, which detail how they intend to use these funds consistent with the specifications in the measure. We're right now working with the Department of Education on the rulemaking, which will answer and put a finer point to a lot of these questions. We've had one work group meeting, and I think we're going to see by the end of today the first draft of rules from the Department of Education. And then the process will go forward with a first reading of those rules before the State Board of Education on January 26th, a rulemaking hearing on January 30th, and then by the end of February, I believe the meeting date is February 23rd, the State Board of Education will adopt the final rules. So we can expect to see definitions around CTE and STEM and so on, as well as other clarifications that have been identified in the process to date. It's what we've been reminding educators and superintendents and school board members is that our priority now is to make sure the dollars are well invested and get the best possible results. And with that in mind, we tried to strike a balance in Measure 98 between state direction and local control. So districts will have a lot of latitude to do what I summarize as customize and sequence these investments. It may be that some districts will want to put more of the dollars into career technical education programs. Others may want to expand their early college credit programs. All districts will be expected to meet certain criteria for dropout prevention activities. But those investments may change over time as well. So it may be that in the first year, a district commits more of its resources to putting in place the systems needed to identify and support students at risk of not graduating from 8th to 9th grade and in 9th grade, and then is looking to invest more in career technical education programs in the second year of their 2-year plan. So we are encouraging districts to think in terms of customizing and sequencing their investments for best results. The first plans will be submitted to the Department of Education on whatever timeline is established in the rules in the first half of next year. The starting point, the baseline for what would be an establishment or expansion of programs is basically January of 2017. So pretty much what's in effect in the current school year would establish the baseline above which districts are expected to establish and expand. We did, however, allow in this first biennium of implementation, in the first year of the biennium, 2017-18, a lot more flexibility for districts not to be burdened by a lot of requirements. It's what we call the easy first year because we didn't want to hold things up. And we're also wanting to enable districts as much as possible and encouraging state lawmakers and the Department of Education to enable districts to tackle dropout prevention strategies beginning next summer, because so much of what we're seeing that works so well to get kids on track in 9th grade have to do with these transitional programs from 8th to 9th grade. So something we want to flag for you is our concern and interest in enabling these programs to get off the ground quickly next summer, so we don't kind of fall behind with those first 8th graders entering high school next year. Again, the language speaks to establishing or expanding, and some examples we've given is that a district may have a half-time program, let's say a welding program, and wants to use the funds from Measure 98 to take that half-time teacher to full-time and enable more students to gain access to that program. All of those are examples of establishing and expanding. It's not that you have to create something brand new. You can expand what's working as well. The measure also makes an exception for what may be funded now with one-time grants. So whether it's a CTE revitalization grant or a STEM grant, the thinking behind Measure 98 was that we want to be able to bring to scale and sustain what has been demonstrated to work effectively in many of the pilot projects in recent years. And so if we see a situation where a district is losing grant funds, which is supporting a program in any of these areas, that is also called out as something which then could be where Measure 98 funds could be used to continue that program. But that's not to be confused with a maintenance of effort requirement. Measure 98 does not establish a maintenance of effort requirement for high school programs, but and we understand there will always be some churn, some reinvestment, and some moving around of dollars in a district's budget for their high school students. We would want to see, though, that how the dollars are used is always expanding access, and we appreciate the emphasis on equity we hear in the conversations to date, expanding access for students to these programs that have proven their value. Measure 98 during the campaign was sometimes referred to as an unfunded mandate. At the district level, it's the opposite of that. It's a funded opportunity because districts will write their plans to apply these Measure 98 dollars to these programs. They will not be obligated to add any district dollars to their Measure 98 dollars, unlike the example we may have had with some districts with full-day kindergarten, where they signed up for full-day kindergarten and then felt that state funding was insufficient to carry forward that program. I don't know if that's fair from the point of view of everybody on the call, but that's what we heard a lot from some districts. But this is not that. This is very much a funded opportunity in that districts will be showing how they're going to spend these dollars, but they're not obligated to spend any additional district dollars for these expansions or establishments of new programs. Something to keep in mind is that Measure 98 provides 1.5% of the total, which if fully funded would be $294 million in the next biennium, to the Department of Education to oversee and put in place systems to focus on outcomes and help districts to do the best they possibly can with these investments. Obviously, if Measure 98 is not fully funded, the amount that flows to the Department of Education is proportionally less. But in the governor's budget, I think that amount would be about $2 million in the next biennium. If fully funded, it would be closer to 4.4. And that's something where we hope that some of what Salam described to you by way of systems at the Department of Education could be funded, and whether that is also something which can help build out systems now in place with the CTE regional coordinators and the STEM hubs. We would encourage that and look for ways in which those synergies could be achieved. Again, we appreciate what Salam and Colt and Lindsay have all said about the commitment to equity. We actually, in looking at some simulations of what kinds of outcomes might be expected from these investments, we hired Echo Northwest to prepare those reports. And in each of the program areas, career technical education, early college credit, and dropout prevention, they focused on what might be achieved with the low-income student population. So those who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And we have a number of studies which we call out in the memo we sent to, we just forwarded to Mark, and he'll get that to you as well. There's some links there where you can look at what are expected to be increases roughly of 6% or so over 4 years in the graduation rate for low-income students. And, excuse me, we actually partnered with the Bend-Lapine District, put a finer point on some of those projections, which they did, and there's a memo that you can see there to look at how they calculated those results. And again, a lot of focus on making sure we're working on the students who are most at risk. Bend-Lapine, by the way, told us they have 213 students in 9th grade who are not on track to graduate. And they know their names, they just haven't had the resources to apply to getting those students back on track. So that's the kind of thinking we're really encouraged to hear from the districts, and we know a lot of districts are ready to go quickly with those 9th grade support programs. Many of them are ready to go with their CT revitalization grants, which were not approved but have been fine-tuned and are ready to go. So we are, again, hoping to see a lot of progress out of the gate in the next school year with the coordination with your council, with the Department of Ed, with the Chief Education Office. We're really hoping to see significant gains in the coming years with these funds.
Thank you, Tim and Toya. So we're gonna come back and ask you to share a little bit more in a minute here, but I wanted to ask a few other questions, and then we'll ensure that we have time for council members to ask some questions as well. So, Salam, can you share the current status on the state and ODE's implementation role and the timeline?
Yes, thank you, Colt. So I think the current status is really consistent with what Tim just shared, and that is we're currently engaged in the rulemaking process, and the rulemaking process, as stipulated by the law, requires the department to have rules in place by March 1st. We are currently also engaged with a number of stakeholders that are helping us think about the components of the rules. And Tim is right, we do have a draft set of rules, and I think they're pretty comprehensive and really address some of the concerns, suggestions, ideas, and things that folks have shared with us. So from a technical point of view, the rulemaking process is well underway. We have about 40 plus stakeholders that are actually involved in this process, and they're helping us think about key components such as how do you define CTE so it is not prescriptive? How do you define components and requirements that help build capacity in schools and districts around the state to do this work, to think about it differently, not just from a programmatic point of view, but also from a sustainable policy framework that helps promote key practices and approaches to supporting students. Also thinking about it from an equity perspective. How do we ensure that students that have historically not graduated on time for a variety of reasons are being focused on and their needs are being addressed from a systemic point of view, but also from an individual point of view. So our current thinking is really around systems design, as Tim said, around supporting schools and districts in developing their systems, shoring up their systems, understanding their systems, understanding their capacity, and also in the long term, developing a system where we could provide on-site technical assistance, partner with regional entities like hubs and others to provide support to those schools and districts that are implementing whatever strategies they choose, and also to monitor and make sure that we have accountability for those funds and those investments to make sure that we are highlighting and showcasing best practices and really advising districts on what's working and what's not working. And this is done in collaboration with schools and districts and regional partners. So there's a technical component in summary, which is rulemaking, and there is more of a systemic component in terms of how do we sustain these investments and make them part of what schools and districts do every day to support students?
Great. Thanks, Salam. I want to invite Brian, and Brian, we understand you don't have a camera with on your computer today, but can you still share what opportunities you see connecting Measure 98 with investment and policy efforts?
Hopefully. Can you hear me?
Yes. Brian, we can hear you. We could.
His mic shows on. Brian, are you there?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yes, thanks.
Okay, I had one more button on my computer here I had to turn on. CTE and Measure 98. Well, it's a little complex at the moment with the governor's proposed budget and what may be occurring. I think that there's going to be some great opportunities, and I think there's some great flexibilities for schools across the state to be able to do some things that they would like to do that they may have had on the books or that they didn't get funded earlier. I think one of the concerns I have right at the moment, and many involved with it, is what might happen with what we had as the pathway funding. And that the dollars for that aren't in the governor's budget. The schools could use the money from the 98 funds that they would get to backfill that. But we don't know how many that will actually maybe do that. And then there were a couple of things that came up when we started down the path on the pathway funding. Some schools were wanting to move it to 2 credits. Some schools were not thinking that going all the way to the 3-credit level was important, and yet the science and the literature show that that is where we make a big change, actually, with the students actually graduating and the students having good success out in the job career area. So I think that that is one of the biggest areas of concern about how this would go on, because the way it was set up previously with CTE dollars for it, it was prescriptive, that the schools would get the money only if they got to the 3-credit level. So that's of interest on there. I think the other couple of things that we're kind of losing now, maybe in the overall budgets and things, are dealing with the statewide teacher development and mentoring component, and then also the course equivalency issue, and how do we get to that? And those are bigger statewide issues, along with than the middle school connectivity. So, as I say, at the moment, there's a lot of opportunities, and I sat through some of the rulemaking meetings, and there's a lot of interest and creativity out there. So I'm just not sure how it will all play out in the next couple of years. I think that's my comments for here. I think it's more for I'm here for questions probably.
Great, thanks, Brian. A couple more questions from me, and then we'll open this up to council members. Jim. So, Toya and Tim, where in Measure 98 do you see STEM specifically and the opportunity to prepare students for high-wage, high-demand careers?
Yeah, so the measure calls out STEM as a preference under the CTE section of the measure, so we definitely want districts to sort of steer towards the STEM fields as well. But I don't know if you have the measure in front of you, but it's on top of page 4 of the measure that we particularly call out STEM. We did not call out STEAM because we know that there's still some questions around what the A means, and didn't want to put that in the measure before really having the clarification on that. But STEM is definitely called out in the measure for the work that the districts could do under CTE.
Yeah, the other thing I would point out is, as we're hearing more examples from superintendents and school board members, there's a lot of overlap between CTE and early college credit, and in some cases overlap with dropout prevention in some districts. So we're encouraging kind of a holistic view of how we can connect these programs, and that preference for STEM actually is in reference to both career technical education and early college credit. So it can be a common theme throughout.
Thank you. Salam, how do you see Measure 98 aligning to current graduation efforts, as well as the Oregon Equity Lens? And also, if you wanted to take any time to offer any thoughts on Brian's questions, I think this is an opportunity as well.
Thank you, Colt. Let me start by the opportunities that Measure 98 provides us. And I believe it really aligns, if you think about it from a systemic point of view, and you think about it from a set of foundational strategies, not just what we call the three things that are really called out, not just the way we think about the three things that are actually called out. I think ultimately the goal is to really change behavior and investments at the local level, and to change thinking relative to root causes that are keeping students from graduating. So as I think about these three particular areas, I think it's really important to unpack them and to really look at specific strategies within them, because schools can develop CTE programs, but you have to think about the focus of those programs. You have to think about the underlying foundations behind those programs to make sure that they are truly supportive of students. So I think that's the opportunity that we have in terms of thinking systemically about strategies. How do those strategies actually translate or articulate into programs and activities? How do you align the system? Because we know graduation is not something that starts in high school. You have to build a culture for it as early as preschool. So I think that's where I see the alignment called, is that the initiative called for three areas. I think we need to think about those from a policy framework as much as a practical framework, and to say, how do we invest those three areas in a very intentional way so students are actually thinking about CTE, and we as the educators think about it and STEM as an engagement strategy. It's part of instruction, and it's something that happens as early as kindergarten, not just high school. So the alignment is in terms of the focus on graduation, the focus on these investments that we know that bear results for students, the focus on equity, and I'll touch on that. I think this is an opportunity for us to really customize, if you will, and personalize learning. We talk about personalized learning for all students, but this is an opportunity to diversify the instruction and differentiate the instruction so it's meeting the needs of all of our students, students of color, students that live in poverty, students from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, students of different orientations. So I think the opportunity here is to think about instruction in a way that meets the need of the students, and that is an equity emphasis, in my opinion. Also, the use of data will really require us and compel us to start thinking about each and every individual student. When you invest in data systems that begin to unpack who your student groups are and begin to drill down as to who's really struggling, and you have a mechanism of finding out who that student is in the 6th week of the semester, then there's really no excuse for us to not pay attention to what that student needs and what they're going through. So I think there is alignment here, and Colt, you've been working on this as well, which is, where do we really invest the resources? We know absenteeism is a barrier. We know that not having comprehensive and reliable data systems is a barrier. We know what indicators we should be looking at to see if students are actually on track to graduating and pursuing further education. This is an opportunity to operationalize all of that and put it into motion, and to expand on some of the things that are happening in schools and districts around the state. On the Pathway Fund, I understand where Brian is coming from, and I concur that that is a point of concern. One way to think about it is that instead of the Pathway Fund, now we have an investment that could help us sustain and continue to build capacity for CTE and STEM fields and careers in our schools. But I'm happy to discuss the Pathway Fund. I understand that it was a reliable source of funding that schools and districts have counted on, and I'm hoping that this investment will become essentially our Pathway Fund down the road. And that is something that we're open to discussing and exploring how we make that happen. Thank you, Cole.
Thank you. So that's one more question that I'm going to do a check-in with Jim and Mark on time, but I want to ensure that we get questions from council members as well. So this is for each of you, and you can chime in, whoever wants to answer first. But when we think about Measure 98, how can the state best provide the necessary systemic supports for quality implementation in each of Oregon's diverse communities and school districts? You know, really thinking about the different elements that we need to consider, like regional collaboration or educator workforce development, those kinds of things, and supporting districts as they implement Measure 98. What are your thoughts there?
This is Toya. I'll just say quickly, one of the things I think you all are looking to do is to create the data systems that allow districts to help identify who the students are. Tim mentioned that we have some districts who know who their kids are but don't have the resources to go after them. Not all districts are in that same position, so any way that you can create those data systems for districts to say, you know, here's what an early warning data system is, here's what it looks like, here are the tools to build it, or, you know, we can help build it for you, so that districts all have the capacity to understand where their kids are in more real time to then go after them using the funds from Measure 98 to make sure they're better on track.
I would add that we've kind of flagged and referred at different times to the challenge of coordinating with our higher education institutions. We were scheduled to present to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, but that got delayed to next month. I think we need to do more thinking about that that involves both the Higher Ed Commission and the Department of Ed.
Salam or Brian, you have any thoughts on that?
Colt, would you please remind me of the question? It cut out a little bit, so I missed a portion of your comments of your question. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really, how does the state provide the necessary systemic support for quality implementation of the measure? And we could be thinking about regional collaboration opportunities, equity, different pieces of this implementation. How can the state provide support for districts?
Okay, so I think I get it. I missed the tail end of that, but I think on our part, it's really about providing technical assistance, and that can be in the form of training. It can be in the form of tools and resources that we provide to schools and districts around the state that will help them think about their programs and think about their investments. It could be in the form of deploying a regional strategy where we have staff that work directly with hubs, ESDs, regional entities, and to partner with them on all aspects of this, from being a thought partner to providing hands-on technical assistance. We see ourselves providing expertise relative to models and strategies. We know some school districts will not be able to support a standalone CTE program, let's say in nursing, but a region might be able to do that. We did that actually in the Salem-Keizer School District, where we formed a partnership with the community and developed a technical center where students from all 6 high schools go and get their training in highly specialized, expensive programs that you can't really afford to have at every single school. So I think it's the systems, it's the technical assistance, it's the hands-on where we have staff that will go out and work with schools and districts and regions. It's building capacity at the regional level to work with colleges, employment, the regional solutions teams. I think it's just bringing all that to bear to help schools and districts implement the best programs and opportunities they possibly can to support their students to be successful and to graduate on time.
Colt, now this is Brian again. I agree with many of the things that Salam has just laid out, and I know that there's a lot of things we can't force into the equation here. So I think some of the things is even looking back at the CTE grants and how we have them written right now, and looking at some ways as maybe we can do some things within them to incentivize, give bonus points if certain things match up in the future plans that the groups do. And that's the type of thing, even for getting industry involved, putting out some information about it, it's going to be much easier to get your industry folks there if you do certain things. And it goes back like to the 3 credits of the career pathways. That's a quality program. 2 is less so, and just having a little bit of a smattering, 1 credit type of scenario in an area isn't going to be as attractive to some of the other partners who might be able to come and provide some more money and assistance to come up with a whole program. I really see some of this. It's going to take a couple of years for us to get a lot of really, I think, well thought out long-term programs together with many of the groups out there with this new stream of funds.
So Jim and Mark, I want to do a check-in. Mark, I saw that you said that there probably is time as one of your other presenters is stuck in traffic or in the snow still. But we're into the next agenda item, which is me. But I think it's, while you have the panel members here, it'd be great if council members could ask their questions. And if there is a need to, I'm happy to come back at a future meeting to do my presentation as well. So Jim, are we okay to go on with some questions from council members?
Yeah, let's do that. Do the council members have questions for the panel?
Hi, this is Romana Flores. I do have a question, and it's kind of like going into the weeds, but is there a communication plan for translations for families to make them aware of these opportunities? I mean, that could be shared throughout Oregon? One thing that I've experienced at various schools is like we're reinventing the wheel with just getting that information out there.
Mm-hmm. This is Toya. I think that's a really great suggestion and sort of another answer to the question Colt just asked about what the state can do to help provide some of those things that districts, would have to do individually. And so having it done one time and then given to the districts would be super helpful, and translation would definitely be in that bucket for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Good question. I have a question.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. I think it's really critical as we look at the implementation of Measure 98 that we think a lot about access, which relates to your question, so that these new Measure 98 programs are serving additional students who may not have been served before. When I shared that demographic data with you on our outcomes, it's critical that we reach student populations that our systems are not currently working for if we really want to see an impact on graduation outcomes and students leaving our system prepared for next steps in their lives. So I really appreciate thoughts like that. Translation and things like that are exactly what we need to be thinking about to serve a broader range of array of students.
This is Jim Pyro. I do have a couple questions. Let me go with the first one. Tim and Toya talked about that this is not a grant program. It's not a competitive program. It's really a funded program. Let's say your program is wildly successful and every school district says, boy, we want in on this, and you only got $145 million to fund this, and you have demands of over $290 million. What's the solution there? Are you just going to cut back everyone's funding and that's going to affect programs, or are you going to restrict participation? I'm just trying to think. This could be, more demand than you have supply, and how are you thinking about that?
Well, the way it will work, Jim, is whatever the total allocation is will be translated to dollars per student allocation. So districts will know how much money they have to work with, and they're going to have to tailor their plans to fit with that amount of money. It's not as if they're going to be submitting plans for that amount to $800 per high school student, as the measure specifies, if what the legislature provides is $700 or $600. So we're going to start with the allocation. That creates the statewide fund. Then from that statewide fund, every district will be able to compute its share, as it does now with the state school fund. It's using the same formula, the ADMW. Right? And then they'll tailor their plans to those funds.
So if the governor's budget ended up at $145 million for the 2 years for this program, it would equate to roughly $400 a student.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right.
And
again, we can think of it though as, and that's $400 per student per year. A district may submit a plan that spends $200 per student in year one and $600 in year two. Again, they can sequence their investments over 2 years. And as long as they're not assuming a level of funding in the following biennium, that creates a problem, right? So, I mean, Measure 98 has a inflation factor built in, but again, it's the starting point will be whatever is allocated in the current biennium.
Just from a logistics standpoint, not to carry the conversation, but school districts are going to have to know kind of what that number is going to be so they can figure out how they build a program. Right. And so we'll just have to think about that.
That's right.
All right, and this is Toya. One of the things we've been talking about in terms of our lobbying efforts is to get the legislature to do this quickly and not hold it up until the end of the session so that districts can start their planning. We want to make sure that districts understand what the allocation will look like so they can get their plans in and start programs this summer, particularly for the dropout prevention work.
Great. Thank you. Other questions from the council? I have one more. Just how do we ensure that school districts or specific schools of color that are high in color or poverty, how do we ensure, or what's the mechanism to ensure that they access these funds and take advantage of them? Because it is a volunteer program, and so I guess this might be a question for Salam or maybe Colt. How do we ensure that those school districts get the support and help to really make this happen for those schools from an equity perspective?
Yeah. So this is Salam. I agree in some sense this is a voluntary program, but I think through communication and with focusing, this is really where the framing and the systems kind of component comes into play, is to say this is the state's strategy for improving graduation. And we will look at our data, and if we find that schools that have low graduation rates and have high numbers of, diverse students, if you will, I'll lump them all together, diverse students, students in poverty, students of color, students that have different background, ethnicity, etc. If we see that they're not applying, we will reach out to them, and we will ask the question just simply, why aren't you applying for those resources to actually support your students to graduate from high school? We will also be generating reports around the accountability that's associated with this, and these reports will be generated on a district-by-district basis. So this information will become public, and I would encourage businesses and legislators and community members and parents to ask their schools if they're not participating, why aren't you participating? So I think we can create not a campaign per se, but essentially a set of communication strategies and promotional strategies, and through accountability and reporting, a way that will compel everybody to participate and take advantage of those resources.
And this is Toya. I'll just add, if I can, for a second. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to add, Toya, that from a Chief Education Office perspective, one of the things that we think could make a difference for districts like those that were described is it isn't always the programs that are being offered in that school district. It is sometimes the connection between that school or school district and the community it's serving. So from our perspective, we plan to provide some support from the Chief Education Office level to help bring together or create models or pathways for culturally specific community-based organizations to partner with the school district to ensure that they're creating programs that have relevance, and that the folks running those programs can create relationships with the students and their families to encourage the access to these programs that Measure 98 will create. So that's part of what the Chief Education Office will prioritize as we think about how to best meet the needs of all of Oregon students. And I know that, and I'll pass this off to Toya with this comment, that as part of the partnership behind Measure 98, many of these community-based organizations and culturally specific organizations are partners with Stand for Children in moving Measure 98 through the process that led to passage. So Toya might want to comment on that as well.
I was just going to say that very same thing, so thanks for setting me up. But yeah, we have many of the partners who helped with this effort were from community-based organizations, and the measure allows for districts to use some of their resources to build those connections because they can't always do it on their own. So we were very cognizant of that as the measure was being written, and as our coalition partners were coming on one by one in different parts of the state to say, our kids need some support, and we are here to help. So let us help districts. But I will also say that the measure allows for the state to hold back some funds to help do some of this work. So thinking about Salam's office and Colt's office in a way that will help districts to sort of reach out to their partners, and we'll be our partners and Stanford Children will be watching as the districts submit their proposals or not submit their proposals. And one of the things we want to do is make sure that we understand where all the districts are as the proposals are coming in, so that we can help troubleshoot that. And our partners could be at the table to talk with our districts about their plans as we move forward. So that's a great question. We want to make sure all of our kids and all of our communities are covered.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the council? Okay, hearing none, I want to thank the panel. This is a huge opportunity for our state. It's a focus in absolutely the right area to get the outcomes we need. Being third worst in the nation is not a place any of us are proud of, and clearly we would like to be in the top quartile of graduation rates, and this is an opportunity to do that. So we'll continue monitoring the work ahead of us and the work that you're all doing, and clearly we have an interest in the CTE and STEM component of that because we do see that a connection to graduation rates. And so keep up the good work. Appreciate all the comments, and we'll continue watching this as the rules get developed and move forward. We'll also try to make sure the hubs continue to be connected on this topic so they can also be another source of help and information to the districts to move these programs forward. So thanks to the panel, and have a great day if you have to drop off. So
thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm going to take Colt's offer up, and we're going to take his item to another meeting because I think we've got enough other things on the agenda. So thank you, Colt, for offering that up, and I think we can wait till the next meeting to hear this, and I think it will tie in nicely, and we get another update on Measure 98 and how that plays out. So let's go back, but now we have full council on the line. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the prior meeting?
Jim, this is Eric, so motioned.
If anyone doesn't approve, okay, thank you. If anyone says no, say no, but we're not going to ask yes because that takes too long. Any no's? Okay, I'll assume the minutes are approved then, but based on no no's. Mark, you were going to give a slight update, an update now that the council is fully engaged now on the minutes a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I just wanted to update the council very briefly. One, when we look at the action items that are in the minutes, I want to note that Trish Conlon has recently left the Department of Education. Laura and her team are working to certainly fill in that functionality. We don't anticipate that will disrupt significantly disrupt efforts there, but just wanted to note that. Also wanted to let the council know that I participated in a Washington State STEM Summit, which was fantastic, attended by about 500 business, industry, and educators. That kind of model would be lovely to bring to Oregon, where we're bringing together our various partners that we're asking at a regional level to come together, but to do that at a state level and increase the visibility of the STEM education plan and also the great work that's happening from a regional perspective. So that's great. The other thing is, I think I'll leave it there in terms of comments. It looks like Heather Stafford is on, so we'll be able to carry on. It looks like Lindsay also may have some comments that he'd like to make, so I'm trying to unmute him. So I'm only halfway with you here. just a second.
Well, while you're trying to get him connected, let me give an update to the council. I want to recognize Eric Meslow and Brian Craig. They went down and testified before Senator Demro's committee on bringing CTE and STEM together into one council. We have a legislative concept that's been moved up. We're making a few tweaks to it. We hope to get that through the next session. That would allow us to bring CTE and STEM together as they should be, as one common effort from a council perspective, and really, because of the close connection of CTE and STEM, really think about this in a holistic way as opposed to two separate tracks. And I think that will be a great move. And I think I sent out the draft before. As we get another revised draft, I'll send it out. But Eric and Brian did a great job explaining the nexus and connection between CTE and STEM. And I think the committee was favorably disposed to the idea. Senator Demro was saying this makes all kinds of sense as we think about a continuum of education as children get exposure to both CTE and STEM in a common framework. So we'll continue to keep you advised of that. Hopefully that will go smoothly through the next session, and it was well received, I think. So more to come on that. Well, whether we have another conversation on STEM or STEAM on this issue, I would hearken to the earlier conversation. The more we can create clarity on what that is, it will kind of have this thing, prevent this thing from wandering into many areas that maybe isn't helpful. So that's my report on that. Turn back to you, Mark. You have Lindsay?
Lindsay has dropped off, so I don't know whether he is joining by phone. Lindsay, if you're there. Okay, great. Well, if he does come back on, we'll bring him. There he is. Lindsay, are you there?
Yes, I've been unmuted, I believe.
There you go.
Mark, you can control your boss, huh?
That's good. Yeah, it's called managing up, right?
Yeah.
So,
I will not comment.
This may be a little bit out of place because I was trying to chime in at the end of the panel, and I'm sorry that Brian has dropped off because I think it would be helpful for him to hear this as well. But it actually fits well, Jim, with what you just were talking about in terms of communication between the CTE Revitalization Advisory Committee and the STEM Council going forward. And I'll be really brief because I know it's a short agenda here remaining. But I want to focus on, I think, two possible synergies. One is I want to just go back to Brian's comment around the Career Pathway Fund because he mentioned some concerns about that not being in the governor's budget. I think we need to look at the conversation around formula funding to school districts as an evolution. A lot of us worked together in 2015 to pass the Career Pathway Fund, which got funded a little bit over $9 million. I think since that time, we had a voter-passed initiative that creates another funding formula stream. Why I mention that is that there's important consensus and work within the Career Pathway Fund that I think needs to be informative of the process going forward. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we're thinking cross-sector about some of this work and going to be making some recommendations to the governor relative to Measure 98 implementation. And we're certainly looking at the Pathway Fund, given its focus around some incentives for equity around the ways it's been trying to create partnership across sectors, and certainly in the outcomes that it has been trying to drive accountability around, working collaboratively with school districts. So I just want to put that on the table as a potential model. And then the last thing I'll quickly say relative to the CTE Advisory Committee and the STEM Council is, as we are putting together sort of a set of recommendations through the work of Colt, most especially, and Salam and myself, I think we would be happy to engage in some capacity of talking with both the STEM Council and the Advisory Committee about where our thinking is and to get your feedback. And maybe there's some opportunity in some capacity to bring elements of both of those groups together at the same time. So that's something we can talk more about after this meeting, but I just wanted to flag that, and certainly appreciate, Jim, your leadership in thinking not only about how we advance STEAM and STEM education in the state, but that integration with CTE as well, which I think is critical for all of us going forward. So I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you for allowing me to add a little postscript to the conversation, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay, for your comments there. That's really good to hear. All righty. Move on to the next agenda item, the Oregon Innovation Plan. I think Heather is on, you said, and you have her presentation. It was sent out earlier, but I assume you could bring it up on the screen.
I can. I just want to check in to see. Heather, are you there from an audio perspective? Heather?
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Figuring it out.
Heather, I've made you
so
present.
So my slides on my screen, or if you want to show them however you want to run it.
If you've got it on your screen, you're now presenter, so you can share your screen.
Okay. So can everyone see my screen then?
Not yet.
Not yet? How's that?
There we go.
Great. If there a presentation mode or something where you can't see this, that'd be great. There we go. So great. Thanks for having me. Sorry it's not in person. It would have been a lot more fun to see all of you in person, certainly. So I'd like to talk to you about, I don't know that I've ever met with this council, and I'm quite familiar with your work, but the Oregon has established an Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship within Business Oregon, which is our state agency for economic development. And apologies for the STEAM acronym there on the slide. The governor changed her verbiage to STEAM, and so usually we kind of follow her lead. So if it's still the STEM Council and perhaps it becomes the STEM/CTE Council, we're all for that, and we'll get that right. But so I'd like to talk to you about why this office was established and a little bit of the history so that you kind of understand where we're going with business and economic development around innovation and entrepreneurship. And about 2 years ago, we got a new director. We did a little bit of restructuring. We did a lot of listening in communities all over the state. And we learned through some data crunching that more than 70% of the jobs created in Oregon came from companies that already called Oregon home. So for a long time, economic development strategies at the state level have been really focused on recruitment and retention and global trade, those types of things. That hasn't changed. We've just upped our focus on kind of the concept of economic gardening, if you will. So that's sort of the environment. We had tools that the state has invested in for innovation and entrepreneurship for a long time, up to 12 years, some, and we've experimented with some other things. But at the state level, we never had a strategy, a real strategy around that was intentional. We never had an office and my position and my team in place to try and connect all the dots and provide some connective tissue for driving this type of economic development forward. So the three elements of an innovation ecosystem and the way that we've structured this work on our end is, one, to focus on integrating innovation into Oregon's strongest industries, so turning those types of technology disruptions into competitive advantages where Oregon already has a lot of strengths. And two is really to construct a regional capacity that supports innovation and entrepreneurship and then connect that capacity statewide to make it accessible. There's a lot of people that are very underserved by our existing infrastructure, not the least of which rural, but lots of underrepresented populations. So looking at what the kind of capacity locally is required to bring on the support for entrepreneurship, and then how do you connect the capacities around the state. And then three is building the pipeline of access to capital. So regardless of demographics, geography, chosen industry, or stage of business, we have a lot of really large gaps in capital access for entrepreneurs and inventors, and that's a real challenge, and we're looking at that. We're working with the foundations, the Treasury, and various other partners to produce the Oregon Capital Scan, which just got published this week. We'll do that every 2 years, and then we'll work to fill those gaps in capital. It's a big task. So all three of these, in fact, are our big tasks. So why Oregon? These are just some indicators that I think are interesting. We're the most immigrated to state for 3 years in a row. We'll see what gets published this year, but more people moving to Oregon than anywhere else in the country. Many of those people are coming from the Silicon Valley. I think 40% of the people moving in have a master's degree or higher. So we're importing a lot of talent, and what do we do with that? How do we look at that as an opportunity? We also were the best performing economy in the nation last year. Despite our budget shortfalls, you would never know it, but we actually had the best performing economy overall on many, many different indicators. Forbes identified Portland specifically as the 5th best city to start up a business out of the 50 major cities in the United States. Oregon firms actually outperformed the S&P 500 peers with a 3% return. We were only one of 4 states that even had positive returns, let alone 3% returns. Portland's home to 96 different breweries. I usually tell this to international audiences, but it's one of those indicators. There's 246 breweries in the state and growing, so it's a huge industry for us in the state. And Oregon's also home to 220 plus specialty crops. So when we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, often I think agriculture gets left out of that equation, and I don't think as a state we can afford to do that. So by employment, this is what the companies in Oregon actually look like. So there's 2% of the companies in the state of Oregon have more than 100 employees. That means 20% or less than 20 employees is 89% of the businesses in Oregon. And the one that I find most fascinating and interesting is that 82% of the companies in the state of Oregon have less than 9 employees. So we are a micro business state. Small businesses are incredibly important to our economy, and they get increasingly important when you get outside of the Portland metro area as well. So this is the types of companies that, from our perspective, we're looking at. Consumer products, agriculture companies, inventors, hardware technology companies, our test ranges, we have drones, advanced manufacturing. Our economy is the second most dependent. We toggle from second or first most dependent in the country on manufacturing as a contribution to our GDP. So STEM and CTE, the ability to make things is just incredibly important. I'm preaching to the choir on this one a little bit. This is something that we publish every year at Business Oregon. It's our Oregon Innovation Index, and there's some interesting things in here that we think are strengths that we can build off of. So we rank 6th in national rankings for patents. That's on an upward trend relative to the U.S. average year over year. Now, of course, that is skewed probably by Intel and Nike quite a bit, but it's a strength that we can build on. We're 10th in R&D investments and 11th in the country for SBIR, STTR awards. And those are federal awards for innovation to take a concept or a basic invention and get it through feasibility and prototyping. It's a huge amount of dollars. It's almost $50 million a year that the state of Oregon brings in undiluted capital for our innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs, technology transfer people. And I would say that that's despite a lot of effort on the state's part to incentivize that. So we're really looking at that closely and how we can integrate more supports for those invention dollars. New company creation, we're 17th. We're on an upward trend, though. As I said, we're second most dependent on manufacturing for our GDP. And high-tech employment, 15th, exports, 12th, and STEM workforce, 15th, and broadband access, 14th. Although I think many of our rural neighbors would maybe disagree with being so high on that one. So the target industry groups that Oregon has identified, and this is through our economic strategies and policy team, they took about a year and actually dove really, really deeply into an analysis of things like shift share and location quotient, average wages, and really tried to identify and update what industries we should be targeting and focusing on, where our real strengths lie in the state of Oregon. So broadly, advanced materials, outdoor gear and apparel, business services, which I can describe if there are questions, food and beverage, forestry and wood products, and high technology. The ones that are represented in red are what we're considering emerging industries, which means we may not have the highest density of contribution to our GDP, but their capacity and location quotient and shift share is growing quicker than any of the others. So I suppose I can take questions at the end. There's a lot here, and I'm happy to share kind of our background data and how these all break down as well, because it's pretty interesting. What's interesting as well, and what my team wrestles with as kind of trying to stay on the future edge of this stuff, is that increasingly technology is developing to such an extent and so quickly that it's breaking down traditional silos. So if you look at things like unmanned aerial vehicles on the left, Internet of Things, ag tech, and digital health, we have almost every industry represented in almost every single one of these. So if even just drones, for example, we have hardware, we have manufacturing, we have data, analytics, cybersecurity, it goes on and on and on. And if that's just the components of the systems that make those work, and if you think about the applications of those systems, they're wide-ranging from defense to firefighting to forestry to agriculture and on and on. So how do we as a state get our minds wrapped around this as to where these technology disruptions are really going to move the industries that I showed on the last slide forward? So if someone had a question about business services, and this was an odd category, I'll go back to this. We're not going to cover it too much because it is mostly services, and a lot of our stuff is focused on invention and hardware type support. But professional and technical services is actually, because now the emerging workforce can work from almost anywhere, we're seeing a huge uprise in people who want to be in Oregon, who work in Oregon, but who work remotely. So many people are putting their executive headquarters here. You see this a lot in Bend, and company management and customer support. So that increasingly virtual workforce who work off a laptop, who could work anywhere, are choosing Oregon as a place to work. That's kind of what's represented there. So what's on the horizon? I mean, given all of these industries that we're looking at and the potential for disruption, you know, this is kind of how I feel like we are at the state level. There's a horizon. Where do we go with this? You know, where do we place our bets? So with Oregon Inc., traditionally, and let me see if I have a slide for that. Well, so this is, I think, important for all of us to really think about how we collaborate and how we envision this future, so that, you know, Oregon's got incredibly limited resources compared to other states. And how do we, and collaboration is the only way we're going to actually take on these new emerging disruptions and turn them into competitive advantages. Workforce is central to that. Getting earlier up on the pipeline through STEM and CTE is essential, because the types of skills that we're needing for these industries are wide-ranging. We need problem solvers, we need troubleshooters, and that requires really, I believe, getting their hands on this stuff much earlier in life. And I think industry, from my perspective, is willing to definitely step up. But I think for those of us on the system side of this, I think we have an opportunity to give them some more organized way to step up to and some way to plug in. So that's true on my side, and with the Talent Council and the workforce side, and of course with STEM and CTE, I see those all as connected. So what we're doing and why innovation entrepreneurship, we're trying to foster more innovation. We're trying to build more entrepreneurs, but also better entrepreneurs through support and mentoring, and then increase access to capital. And the breakdown of what our division looks like, which may be helpful, is some of the programs that we manage. My team sees itself as responsible for some of the strategic alignment of these programs. We do scopes of work and contracting with a lot of these governor-appointed boards. Metrics and reporting, we manage those boards, and then we're responsible for legislation and policy on many of these things. And those bodies of work fall into really three categories, so innovation and capital and ecosystem. So on innovation side, which is probably where there's most alignment with the STEM and CTE work, is Oregon Innovation Council, or Oregon Inc., you may have heard it referenced, is a 12-year-old investment by the legislature to create signature research centers. So you may have heard of those as ONAMI, OTRADI, and Oregon Best. Their focus is nanoscience and microtechnologies, bioscience, and what's moving into life science and digital health. and clean tech and agricultural technologies. We also coordinate with the 4 vice presidents for research at the 4 largest research universities in the state and their technology transfer offices through this board to try and bring some more collaboration, coordination to understanding what resources those universities have for invention. And then, as I said, SBIR, STTR support is going to be a focus. We've piloted a support program that has already, just in the first year, had a 40-to-1 leverage on the state dollars spent to bringing more new dollars in for inventors into the state. So that we want to make permanent. And we're pursuing high impact opportunities. So these take the form of public-private partnerships, where we, as the Innovation Council, make catalytic investments into projects where there's multiple stakeholders. It could be universities and industry, ideally, nonprofits and entrepreneurs at the table, to pick an industry that they feel is ripe for innovation and bring on some capacity in the state to bring that forward. That could look like makerspaces. It could look like the OMIC project, some projects out there in Scappoose, which is also under our body of work here. Really anything. Right now we're just taking information in from industry, and then we're going to match that up with universities and look at where we feel like those opportunities are. We have an Invent Oregon competition, which is just brand new. The application process hasn't even closed. We're doing with this with the Lemelson Foundation and Portland State Business Accelerator based off their Clean Tech Challenge. So this is going out to community colleges and universities, private or public, all around the state to bring on this capacity to support local invention competitions at their school, and then connect those students who are inventing into a statewide competition where they'll get a lot of fame and a little bit of fortune, $50,000 prize. And then I write STEM or STEAM and CTE, which I may just change back to STEM and CTE, but that's because it's really important to us to really learn more about where you're identifying opportunities and to match those up so we're creating a real pipeline. So we're also trying to match up invention with capital and what kind of capital is available for the types of innovators that are out there, and then how do we get the technical support for them? How do we get them into incubators and accelerators? How do we develop communities to support those? And right now we have a focus on rural so that we can build up the capacity there before we connect the state. There's also things we receive from the legislature, like Oregon Metals Initiative and RAIN in the South Willamette Valley, which is a regional entrepreneurship innovation network. So any questions on this? I think this is about it for my presentation, actually.
Any questions from members of the council?
Hi, this is Herb. In most of these businesses, they're probably looking, as they get jobs going, they're probably looking for more experienced people. Do you have any ways to provide internships to companies so they can bring in younger folks? Especially those that may not be all the way through their education yet.
This is something that our signature research centers have been, they recognized it a few years ago as a real need. And there is the MECOT program, there are internship programs, but there's actually, we're playing with the idea of whether we should sustain that funding through Oregon Inc. It's really, they're not young people internships, so they tend to be PhD candidates that take internships at companies because they can do something. They're a little bit higher up on that, but there's a huge need. I've been doing a lot of work with the metals group because of OMIC, and they really would like to get 15 and 16-year-olds in there using some of this 3D printing equipment, this robotics, doing CAD design, and all of that. So there's a need out there, there's a desire to do it, but we don't currently have a program that would get that young, unfortunately. I would love one.
Yeah.
And then there was a question about rural entrepreneurship, and the Rural Entrepreneurship Initiative is just in its pilot phase. We're working with 4 communities, 4 rural communities around the state, La Grande, Baker City, Klamath Falls, and Coos Bay. And we've worked with those 4 communities to basically do community and business planning to find out, to asset map their community and to really understand what assets they have to bear, what underutilized resources they have in the way of buildings or organizations, and then through collaboration, how can they bring on the capacity to support entrepreneurs to make visible some of the invisible resources. So in most communities, there's a small business development center or an economic development district. If they're a larger community, sometimes they have an incubator or an accelerator, but oftentimes those services are very disconnected from one another, and they're actually very hard to find for the entrepreneur. So we took a lot of time and listened to our entrepreneurs, and overwhelmingly we heard, I think there's all these great resources here. I think there's, money at the state. I think there's a loan fund. I just don't know where any of this stuff is. So that's the real focus, is to bring on capacity in rural and then make make some of the services that we have in this state, which is a lot. There's 60 incubators and accelerators in the state of Oregon. 60. I mean, it's a lot. We're really, really good at helping entrepreneurs, and the fact that entrepreneurs aren't finding these resources, that's where we're trying to plug in and be that connective tissue so that they understand what's out there. Does that help?
Other questions from the council? I have one question, Heather, and something I've heard many times from the entrepreneur community is they can start great ideas, but they don't see the management capability to bring projects to scale. The thought process of how you put an organization together and how you build a team to take an idea and bring it actually to full commercial scale. And there's a little bit of they view a lack of that capability in the Oregon and the metro area. Have you seen that as an issue, and how are you addressing that?
Yeah, that is a big issue. The growth of an entrepreneur, I mean, it's certainly not for the faint of heart. You get, engineers who invent something, who start something and try and take it to market on their own without a full team around them is the first issue that we see, that we're trying to come up with ways where we can match business development talent and engineering talent to form these startups earlier. That would be helpful. The other real challenge is always money, right? Especially the kinds of technologies that we want to see in the state of Oregon are those types of technologies that really change the world, right? That are sustainable, that contribute positively, that solve some of these big problems the world is faced with. The unfortunate part is that the market has failed these types of entrepreneurs and these types of inventions because they're not quick, scalable types of things that angel investors or venture capitalists can flip really quickly and make money off of. So there are those types of inventions, and they're mostly around the software and app type space. And from the state perspective, we wouldn't necessarily intervene in that because the market's working fine. So where we're trying to focus is how do you get hardware-based, invention-based, product-based, agriculture and outdoor gear and apparel type businesses, how do you commercialize them? There are various stages in which they need capital, and we're missing a lot of those. We're missing a lot of those stages. So the work that we're doing with the Oregon Growth Board to align what industries we're most interested in with what mentorship around the state that we have, that's really important. So that all things being equal, if there's another tech fund to invest in through that body, through that fund of funds, or there's an outdoor gear, or there's an ag tech, or there's a consumer products fund, or an advanced manufacturing fund, then we can prioritize those more along the line. So that's what we're working toward. It's not a perfect science. We're really, really light on the very high end. Once a company is ready to really scale, we lose a lot of companies because that money lives in Boston or the Silicon Valley for the most part. So oftentimes we grow good companies, but it's hard for us to retain them.
Heather, have you talked to any of the social investment funding organizations like SoFi? I've really been intrigued by them and talked to them some. They're open to a lot of really new things.
Which investment fund? I didn't catch
like SoFi, I think There's several out there now.
These are social investing funds.
Yeah, social investing funds.
We are very interested in crowdfunding and the new types of community capital that are coming online. Oregon was the 16th state in the country, actually, to pass an interstate exemption, so that this is going way into securities stuff, but basically any Oregonian, no matter how much money you make now, can invest in and get equity in a company, where that wasn't the case before. Only fairly wealthy people who were worth over $1 million, those types of things, called an accredited investor, could make those investments. Now anyone in the state of Oregon can do that, even kids.
And with SoFi, anybody can invest in it, and they make their investments not based solely on your credit history, but on what you're actually doing. It's more of a social criteria.
Yeah.
Fits with their investors' criteria.
And we see Oregon taking the lead in this area. I mean, there's other questions, and hopefully Mark can share my email address. I'm happy to answer any questions on email. But yeah, this huge opportunity for Oregon social investing.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather. Very interesting presentation, very important work to stimulate business. These are the future businesses that are going to employ a lot of the Oregonians, and our job is to ensure we have a qualified workforce to fill these jobs. So that's really good, and thanks for the update.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. The next agenda item, we're a little bit behind, but not too bad, is get an update on one of our grant programs. This is the Math in Real Life Professional Development Grant Program, and obviously this is a very innovative area that we're trying to explore and find what works and how to engage our kids in a different and deeper level. So I think Tom Thompson's on the line, and Mark Freed is on the line, and Sue's on the line. So Tom, you're up.
Yeah, good morning. I'm trying to see, I don't see the presentation. I've tried to boot it up there.
I see it.
You do see it? Okay,
yeah.
Great. And I just wanted to acknowledge that in the Math in Real Life project, there is a team of 3 people that have been involved in this. Mark Freed is our math specialist. Sue Wilson is our recent hire, is an applied math specialist. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time just kind of quickly summarizing what the project's about for those of you who may not be fully familiar with it, an update of where we are, and then we have a couple people online to share kind of what this looks like locally or regionally, and then go back to what might be the future of this work. So the focus of the Math in Real Life project is really developing a regional professional development. Grades 7 through 10 are the ones that we focus on in this case for various reasons. And there's a piece that's about students, increasing students' mathematic achievement and interest in mathematics, but there's also a piece about helping teachers develop their knowledge of application and enthusiasm for and self-efficacy about teaching mathematics from an application perspective. It's not an easy thing. It's not just finding the problem, the 2-sentence problem at the end of the chapter. The work that the teachers have to go kind of go into to try to identify what those are and teach these in authentic manners is really a lot of hard work, and we're learning a lot from the groups that are out there. The recipients in this grant are spread around the state. There are six different regional projects. All of them happen to coincide with STEM hubs. So we've been leveraging that work and trying to bring the STEM hubs up to speed. That's partly it's a good thing because as we think about sustainability, having this anchored in STEM hubs, as long as STEM hubs are there, they can then provide some of that leadership within the region. And particularly Portland Metro, the STEM hub in the Portland area, is providing some resources in terms of how to evaluate the effectiveness of the project using some of the common measures that they've been putting together. The whole project is centered around this community of practice. It's not something where we're simply handing a series of lessons to teachers and say, go ahead and teach this, because actually the kinds of lessons, the things that we're trying to get teachers to put into place are kind of rare out there, and actually being able to teach them effectively takes, as I said, a lot of work. So this whole community of practice is based on a model that we have these regional partnership teams, and that's the 6 regions I showed you earlier. And each one of those teams has multiple school or district math teams that are arranged either around grade level, around content. It was up to each region to decide how to do this. So there are clusters of teachers that are working together to develop lessons, and not only develop them, but also put them into place in classrooms, see how students interact or react to those, and also then make modifications and eventually make those lessons available to other teachers from around the state. So it's our role in the Oregon Department of Education is to provide some level of assistance to those regional partnership teams to try to help make sure that what we're moving forward, it has some consistency across the state. We don't know everything there is to know about the work. Mark and Sue and I meet somewhat frequently to try to talk about the work, to learn more about it, but we also learn heavily from the partners that are doing this work around the state. Right now, looking at the numbers, the total investment was about $1.4 million. We have 71 high school teachers that are involved across the regions, 51 middle school teachers. This is an estimate based on some of the applications and everything, but the students that will be experiencing some of these lessons that teachers are developing, we expect to be over 12,000 students around the state. And at this point, teachers have developed and posted at least drafts of about 100 lessons. There could be far more than that by the end of the whole project. We've supported from ODE, supported some of this work through a variety of methods. We awarded the grants in February. We had a statewide meeting to kind of roll out some things that we've known about for a number of years in some of our past work as far as how to actually incorporate context into mathematics teaching. And that was in an April meeting. October, we had a second meeting where we began to learn a little bit more about what this actually looks like in the field, and have the participants, the 6 regions, be able to share some of their work with the other regions as far as what was happening around there. So we really truly see this as a community practice where ODE is part of that community. We're not the providers of information. We're learning along with all of these groups to what those best practices seem to be. We will have another one of those meetings in March, and in May we hope to have all the lessons that have been developed done, ready, posted, and start making those public. Through all of this, there's ongoing regional teacher team meetings that are happening from all around the state in various ways. Some of them, all the teachers come together in one location. Some of them are sending out where specialists are working with teams at several different locations. So different models for doing that depending on the geography, depending on the needs of the region. But what's really, I think, interesting is just to understand specifically what's happening out in those regions. And I've chosen 2 regions here. Mark Redmond from Frontier Oregon STEM Hub, I see he's now on camera, and he's been patiently listening to all of this, and he will have a presentation later also about the STEM Hub, but I wanted him to share some things about lessons that they're developing. And it was interesting to hear the last presentation because theirs is around UAVs, drones, trying to center some of the lessons around that. So it was an interesting technology focus, and we'll shift to that in just a second. And the other person online, which I'm hoping she's still online, is Regina Childs, working at Lane ESD. And Regina is going to share something about a social justice lesson that they've developed and the teachers have developed there. And it got some interesting press, and I think is a fascinating look at how we can use this to really look at the equity in mathematics. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. We just have a couple pictures, but I'm going to let him have some time to share a little bit about what's happening in terms of his area. Mark, you on?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Tom?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So I'll ask you if you don't mind to forward here when I'm ready. But the first picture that's up there is of a grain pile, and for our Math in Real Life grant, we chose to write math lessons predominantly around the use of drones, and so that involved drone training, some professional development around using this app called Drone Deploy, and although it looks animated, that is actually a grain pile that's just out of Adrian, Oregon, over here, about 15 miles away from where I'm at now. And in short, what that does is you take these drones that we have they're in Harney, Baker, and Malheur counties now. I think 16 high schools and middle schools have them. And you take that drone out, it operates on GPS, and you turn it on with the app, and it immediately gives you a screen that's utilizing Google Earth. And it's about a 500-foot elevation view of right where you're at right there, the drone. And it puts a grid that looks just like a football field with, 10-yard line, 20-yard line, that kind of thing, right over the top of that picture, and allows you to select the size of that grid and where you want it to fly in reference to where you're at. You literally just hit fly, and the drone takes off on its own. It goes up, it flies up and down all of those lines, and after about 5 minutes, it'll come back, it'll land, and it will download that image in 3D, and that's what you're looking at here. And so just real quick, the buttons on the left side, you can see you can get a 2D map, you can get a 3D model, you can get elevation and all that kind of stuff. And this particular lesson that this instructor wrote was on volumetrics. And if you go to the next slide, please, Tom, you can get an idea of the ways that you can calculate the volumetrics of this grain pile. And so you're looking there on the left side now, and you can see that there's area, fill, volume, all that kind of stuff utilizing this app. And one of the things that one of the districts is doing, or one of the teachers is doing, is this is just right next to the school, is every morning during harvest season you can go out and hit that fly button, and that drone will go fly over and over and over again, same route, everything's the same, and you can calculate the volume, the increased yield, everything about this grain dump. And so they're utilizing the drone locally in ag to implement some math lessons. Now if you go to the next one, please, Tom.
Okay.
Is it coming up?
There you
go. All right. So this has a couple things I wanted to talk about. It's very similar. Now on the right side over there where there's the line, that's not a grain dump, that's actually a sugar beet dump, and at the bottom of it you can see the machinery there that kind of waves a fan back and forth and just slowly works its way south, I guess, or to the bottom of the screen, and you can, it's huge. Now if you look over on the left side of that screen, you'll see the line, which is a graphical analysis of the one that's on the right, and it has the elevation of that. So you can see that at the starting point, it's obviously 0, and then it comes up, and that beet dump is about 25 feet high. So there's a lot of math here that we can do, and again, there's all kinds of lessons we've written around this. But I also wanted to point your attention to, if you look to the field to the left of the beet dump, you'll see that it's obviously on a pivot and circular, and you get a piece of it there. But this drone app, and Tom, if I can get you to scroll back to the very first screen of the 3 pictures, please. This drone app has plant health. So you see 2D, 3D, and then plant health and elevation right there. If you click on plant health and you have a overview of a field, that drone will pick up the reflectance of light off of the foliage there. And so if we have fields out here that aren't getting enough water, they're getting too much water, they have some pest problems, maybe they're not getting enough fertilizer, that changed the reflectance of the light. And I didn't have a picture, I only wanted 3 here, but it looks in essence just like an infrared picture, where the healthy parts of the field are green and the unhealthy parts, based on the reflectance of that light, are red or bright purple. And a farmer can actually calculate yield off of this, a percent based on how efficient their watering practices are. They can determine if insecticides are working, pesticides are working, that kind of thing. And so we've had, in short, we've had a lot of interest in using these drones around real-life math. It's really intrigued a lot of our math teachers. I think when we rolled this out, we had math and CTE teachers in the same room. The math teachers really questioned where the mathematics of this was initially. The CTE teachers can see it a little bit easier. And by the end of the training, and we're not completely done, but about third day in, the math teacher started realizing that I can use this in a math class with kids and explain how they can use a very complex concept I'm trying to teach them in math, how to use it in real life. So that's all I have, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And then the next, Regina, are you there? Looks like she's, oh, there she is. Okay. Can you, are you unmuted there, Regina?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So
okay.
do you want to share a little bit about the social justice lesson that that your team, your group has developed?
So we have here locally, yeah, hello. We have locally here four different grade level teams, 7th through 10th grade, and this year showing 8th/9th grade team. So these are algebra students who are current 8th grade students who are currently in an algebra high school level class. And what this team chose is a social justice issue around school segregation, first looking nationally at national data from all across America, and then more in Oregon, and then they brought it down to the local level, really looking at borderlines and looking at one of their guiding lesson questions was, that's the intro to the lesson, how can data grow our understanding about trends in schools, racial diversity, directions in segregation in regards of linear functions. So that was their intro into the lesson, and students looked at various data and looked online, and then they were given a graph from the 80s and then made some predictions along the line. How would that look these days? Today's, what are your predictions that would look the school segregation in 2015, looking at data from past civil rights movement. So here we have a panel discussion. The group, the math teacher here invited 3 times groups to discuss the topics. Students made questions and then asked the panel these questions. It was divided into teams, and we invited the local newspaper to this panel discussion, and it made it to the newspaper, and the students got pretty much covered in the newspaper here. Yeah, so they're going on with the social justice topic, this team right now, and they took on this, what we are focusing on currently on the cultural responsive teaching framework. How can we integrate cultural responsive instruction into the mathematics classrooms? And we're looking here at 5 key principles: the cognitive demand, the depth of knowledge and students' understanding, mathematical discourse, and power and participation in the math course classroom. How is academic language support for linguistically, here I struggle, diverse students, and culture community-based funds of knowledge and social justice support. So clearly these students here really looked at the social justice support and creating social justice issues. However, we really want to point out that any one of those 5 key principles we identified at this point are can be integrated in the classroom at any time, but not all 5 need to be in it every time. So that's what we have been coming up with. It has been very interesting to hear what students had to say after. They were highly involved and highly motivated in those lessons, and had really good insights and shared their insights, and individual videotaping of students. They were invited for interviews. We can't provide those interviews, but I think it was shared at the OLN meeting last month. So that's one of the teams. Other teams do different topics, and one team also will choose the minimum wage topic in the future here. And we're hoping to integrate maybe the newspapers in every district that they can come. We'll see how that will go and roll out.
Thank you, Regina. Appreciate that. And we'll have some time. I hope you stay online here, so if anybody has any questions as we finish up the presentation. A couple things that came up, and I think Jim Pyro asked about how some of these things could be sustained over time. And one of the things we've been thinking about here in the agency is how exactly that. How do we actually link this up? It's not an isolated project. It needs to be something much bigger than and something that addresses broader issues in terms of mathematics and mathematics education. I don't have time to really dig into these deeply, but maybe at a future date we can talk about these things, or we can have some communication in other ways about what's going on. One of the projects that is just really getting off the ground really started in a couple years ago with some work that Mark Freed and I were doing and kind of talking about, which is the high school math pathways, and looking at ways in which students can actually get the math credit they need for graduation and make it more appropriate to their interests and their needs. Right now, we essentially have in many schools one pathway. It's Mark and I and Sue refer to this as the calculus pathway. It's really moving on towards that, but there are a lot of students that aren't necessarily on that pathway yet do need a strong foundation in mathematics. And this particular project involves not only changing some of the pedagogy and teaching mathematics as we're doing in Math in Real Life, but also looking at what is the actual content that is necessary for all students to be able to work effectively and move on and be able to move into college and careers. That work is really leading us to down the road the math standards adoption 2020 and 2022. So we're thinking way far out here and thinking that if we're doing this work now, we're not just beginning to think about it the month before we actually have to adopt math standards. So we're trying to set the stage so that the work that goes into those math standards really is reflective of the things that we're learning through Math in Real Life and through some of the other projects. Another part to this is we've made some connections with post-secondary, particularly Oregon State University, now working with them about doing a convening in June that would address some of the issues and some of the things that we're seeing emerging that are particularly difficult for math teachers, where have not been part of their training, their education, and how do we bring these folks together to be able to share ideas and learn and be able to expand their capabilities to work within teaching mathematics, and also even bringing together pre-service or early service teachers through Oregon State. We've also had some initial conversations with University of Oregon. We've had some work that we've been doing with the University of Oregon directly with mathematics, the mathematics department there, but also with the education area and the people that are actually working with helping teachers learn how to teach mathematics. So that's part of that. If we can get some of this work embedded in those training programs and in the universities, then that's more likely to be sustained. And finally, looking at the Oregon Math Network, a loose network of teachers out there, how do we leverage that? How do we make sure that people are part of that network so they can see this work going on, can appreciate it, learn about it, and be able to be part of that work? So those are some of the things that we are working on to link the current project, Math in Real Life, to a broader set of initiatives related to math teaching and learning. We've also had a little bit of discussion, and Mark was asking about, Mark Lewis was sort of asking, well, what would this look like in maybe a version 2? And some of the things that we're seeing that would be, if we see a version 2 of this, is doing a deeper dive into appropriate pedagogy. So what's emerging out of this is this focus on mathematical modeling. And both Mark Redmond and Regina were talking about things that are really about math modeling, and how do you model the grain piles and the work that's going on in those piles, and in Regina's case, how do you use mathematics to model some of the trends and things in social justice issues. So how do we dive deeper into those pedagogies and help teachers really understand that and be able to incorporate that better into their teaching? Again, we want to expand the number of teachers. So I said we had about 121 teachers total. If we're really going to make some progress, we need to at least triple that number, so we need to be able to expand that and do more collaboration with post-secondary institutions. One of the other pieces is these isolated lessons are great. They kind of help teachers build some of these possibilities into their daily teaching, But down the road, we really look at developing coherent units and courses based on some of what we're learning is really the place where it's going to have a major impact on students. And we have some experience with that with some past projects, but that should be a focus as we move forward. And finally, open education resource platform, having some avenue to be able to share all these to all educators so they don't have to start from scratch every time. So that's some of the things we thought about in terms of what this might look like in a version 2.0 as we move forward. At this point, I'm going to stop my presentation and open up for any questions and from the council. If there's anything, and I think Mark Redmond and Regina are still there, so they might be able to respond to some of the things that they've been doing with their teachers.
Any questions from the council? I have one. Are you so you've developed these programs or curriculum, you offer it to the students. Do you somehow determine whether it's effective in delivering the outcomes you're looking for, which is interest in math? Is there a way you're trying to determine the effectiveness of these programs?
I'll mention that and then let Mark or Regina chime in if there's some additional details they'd like to do. We are using each project is required to measure the student, the impact on students as far as their attitudes and as far as something about their understanding of mathematics. Some of the projects have chosen to use some of the common measures developed with the Portland Metro STEM Hub. Others have kind of developed some of their own for various reasons. And so yes, we are trying to measure those things. It's a little early right now. There's some of these projects have been doing some pre-measures and do some post-measures later on, but many of these lessons are just now appearing in front of students as they were developed towards the end of last school year and throughout the summer. And open up to Mark Redmond or Regina if you have any additional comments about the work that you're doing in that line.
I agree with Tom. Currently, it's a little bit early. We gave a student attitude survey and also teacher efficacy survey. So we had only the pre-survey. We don't have a post-survey yet. However, I was able to visit like 3-4 classrooms, and I think
kind of lost you there, Regina.
Only students' attitudes, but also teachers' behaviors a little bit. And frozen. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yeah, now we got you. Oh, we lost her.
You want me to go ahead and speak?
I just took off her video to hopefully improve the connectivity of her bandwidth. So hopefully your audio is still working, Regina.
Yeah, I hear it. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Back? Does it work now?
Yeah, we were just turning off your video so that maybe it won't.
Oh, okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that it's also changing teachers' teaching practices, and that's a big shift for some of the teachers I'm working with. And for others, it comes more natural than others, but there have been some really, really good conversations around the shifts, and especially incorporating the cultural responsive instructions and the big aha moments. So I'm hopeful for the next round of lessons. That the initial ones were a little bit tricky for some of the teachers I've been working with, but I'm really hopeful for the next round. They're finally, they're really starting to get a better understanding what we're trying to do. So I think we are right now moving out of the prototype phase and hopefully going into the next level where they finally made that connection that we want to shift math practices and math instructions and see how that also transfers over to the students. I really think students like those lessons and definitely more engaged. They're and productive struggle, so that's another thing, that a teacher not always just jumps in when the students struggle. So that has been also difficult for some of the teachers, not just to, I help you right now, rather than saying wait and see.
Okay. Any other questions from the council? Well, this is real exciting work that you're doing. It has great promise. Obviously, I like Regina's comment around engagement of the students. That's really what this is about, is to get them more interested and see the application of math and do it in real life application. So great work, Tom, and continue to watch the progress. And I liked your 2.0 ideas, and hopefully we can continue to see how we can move this program forward after this cycle is completed.
Thank you for allowing us to talk about it.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, last agenda item is some progress on the STEM Hub in Malheur County, and we have Mark on the line who just talked to us about the drone project, but he's obviously got a great hub out there. They're doing some pretty cool work, so Mark, you're up.
All right, I just want to double check everybody hear me, and can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you for allowing us to share what we're doing out here. I'm cognizant of the agenda. We're a little over time, so I'll make sure we're done when we need to be. The first slide that I have here is, I think, explaining what we're doing in the STEM Hub is a little bit easier if I give you a high-level view of what we're actually doing in the county. And so this slide here is a poverty prosperity asset map, and really about 5 years ago, about the same time the RACs came out, Malheur County had 5 individuals, local industry businessmen, came together and said, you know, we really want to start something here. We want to improve what we've got. We've got a high poverty rate. The businesses are having a hard time coming to our area because of a lack of a skilled workforce and that kind of stuff. So on the screen here, you're going to see the 5 blue circles up top here, and these are those individuals that started that. And they each chair an individual committee, and those are all listed there. And you'll also see that we have the 3 largest school districts on the right side that are participating. We've got our Eastern Oregon CTE region, which actually is over 6 counties as well. We have our college and career. There's our Frontier Oregon STEM Hub down in the bottom in green, Early Learning Hub. We have a Poverty and Prosperity Equity Committee as well, which is a big part of our initial backbone funding from STEM, the college, and the ESD. And together that group has met for 4.5, going on 5 years now. In the initial phases, it was twice monthly. Now we're just down to once monthly because things are starting to go pretty well. And so when it comes to STEM, if you look at the Tech Center Chair, Ken Hart, his job is to try to encourage the development and building of a local tech center. We obviously have smaller districts. I know Salam mentioned earlier about how Salem-Keizer was able to take 6 or 7 high schools, put them all together into a CTE center. All of our high schools are 1 high school per district. They're usually very small. And to make this work and be sustainable, we need to actually have different districts send their high school kids to the same tech center in order to have enough kids to run it to make it efficient. And so that has been our predominant task in the last 3 or 4 years now. Now we haven't got a tech center, but what we have done is we've created a CTE/STEM pathway that is increasing in the number of kids that it's affecting, increasing in the pathways. And so the next slide I'm going to share with you is what we're looking at for next year. And we're going to try to shoot for 5 pathways. I don't know if we're going to get there, but we're going to try. Now, 4 years ago, we started the welding pathway, and you could see the different welding classes there and what they're going to ultimately end up with at the very bottom. These are industry-level certifications we're trying to reach, and so we're looking for an AWS 3G certification from those kids. The second year, we started health, and inside of that, we have CNA1, EMT, CNA2 we're working on, and those are the certifications that we want to result from those. And then the third year we started ACS, which is actually this year. This is the first year this has been rolled out, and it's automated control systems and manufacturing, and you can see the different things that we're working on there, including robotics, hydraulics, electricity, and that kind of stuff. They're looking for a NIM certification as well. All right. We think next year we're very confident we're going to be able to roll out the computer networking sequence. And at the end of that, we're looking at CompTIA A+ and CompTIA Net certifications. And all these certifications are built around what industries at the table telling us they need. And that's what the basis of this is and our goal at the end. The ECE is the early childhood education. I'm not sure we're going to get to that, but we're putting it on the docket, and if we can make it work, we can make it work. So that's the background. The next slide is going to give you an idea of the complexity of it. This is an option that we're looking at for next year, and what this option will do is it will help us increase the number of districts participating from 3 to 5. So they're not school, I mean they're districts. They're actually different districts that are all about 15 to 20 miles apart. And so we've got trying to go from 3 to 5 districts. It would increase the number of CNA students from those districts completing their CNAs from 20 to 32. Increase our number of welders getting that AWS 3G certification from 40 to 60. And it's also more cost effective. The black line through the middle of that, everything above there, if this was the model we chose, would be done at the high school levels. And you can kind of see where the high schools are actually sharing instructors on the site. And then the yellow and the bright purple there on the bottom would be what would be done on site at the college. And so that's what we're doing with Treasure Valley Tech. And that sets the stage for what we're doing with the STEM Hub. So the next slide here has the key goals that were outlined in our STEM Hub. And you see the first one there, it says in partnership with TVCC, the Frontier STEM Hub will focus on creating opportunities and exposure to STEM fields for students in grades K to 3, or K to 8, I'm sorry. And so if you look at the funding, there's, you know, we've been talking about this, there's Perkins funding, there's CTE Revive funding, there's Measure 98 funding, and you know, don't know where we're at with Pathways funding. All of those are high school only. And so the STEM Hub, I mean, you know, STEM starts earlier than high school. And I think you look at a lot of the research will tell you that the best way to have a really productive high school program is have a really productive middle school program. And even before that, down to kindergarten, as Salam was saying. And so we've chose to really focus our funding for the STEM Hub in K to 8. Now we're not excluding high school, but there is a lack of funding right now, K to 8, in terms of STEM and CTE, and STEM we can spend it, but on the other ones we can't. And so that's our primary goal right there, along with other goals below that about promoting and supporting computer science education and coding, developing stronger and more extensive connections with formal and informal learning communities, improving access to quality STEM, and inspiring youth. The last one on there was to develop and sustain an equity committee that serves the P2P. And regarding that, we have 18 individuals that are now on our equity committee, part of that first screen that I showed. They are all undergoing equity training with Bill Grace over the course of about the next 14 months. It's pretty extensive. And doing that has allowed us to get some grant funding, and in total I think we're up to about $75,000 from Oregon Community Foundation, Meyer Trust, and Ford Family. And all of that started with $5,000 that we had written into our STEM Backbone grant. So making a lot of progress, and I want to show you some examples of what we're doing on those other goals up there. So next screen here we have is what we've done so far. Left-hand column is STEM professional development for teachers. The right-hand column is STEM experiences for students. And you go on down there and you're going to see a list of stuff that are around creating pathways to TVT. So if you're going to start to see things in the 4th and 5th grade like coding.org is where we're rolling out 4th and 5th grade stuff, which is going to transition into Lego robotics, which are in the 6th and 7th grade. Our 8th and 9th graders are going to be doing VEX robotics, which is the next level up. And those kids will then channel into our automated control manufacturing pathway and our computer networking pathway. You're also going to see in here that there's, we just finished this up last week or 2 weeks ago, was the Health Career Day at TVCC that had 340 kids attend. So the idea is we are providing those pathways for our K-8 students into our Treasure Valley Tech high school CT and STEM career fields and certificates we're trying to get there. I just want to note, and I think this is an important fact here, these 2 pages, if you look at the date, you see 9/15 of this year, and then I know she's got some stuff looking forward to what's kind of coming in the future, but you see the last one on the left side here is 12/8. We were a second-tier STEM hub, so we came along and got our funding this past spring. We started Nikki, we hired her in August. And so these 2 screens are what we've done so far. And we've done that. Our initial ask for the STEM Hub funding was $21,000. We ended up getting $52,000 for our backbone. About 2 weeks ago, we were able to get our program funding. So all of this stuff that you see here has been done with the backbone funding and the funding that we've got from our ASD and the school districts and that kind of stuff. We haven't even got to the program funding yet. And once we're actually in the process of purchasing what we need with that, and I think we're going to really take off from there. But I think it's important to note that this is what we've done in 4 months. And keeping track of all these numbers, I think there's been pretty solid things happening locally. I wanted to share a couple of things that are happening. So these are all pieces of that schedule that she's got listed there. This is an article out of the local paper. This is a Google Expedition. What it is it's a classroom set controlled by the teacher of reality goggles. You may be seeing Google Cardboard and that kind of stuff. And these are probably 2nd or 3rd graders here. And they're looking at biomes and that type of stuff and learning about science and the different kinds of biomes. And you can actually take them there. And you literally see these kids, they'll be looking in those goggles there, and they will stand up and start walking across the room thinking that they're actually in a biome that they're looking at in there. And you actually have to grab them and say, you know what, you need to go sit down because they're going to run right into the wall. And it's great to watch them put these goggles on and the excitement that it generates. And we're keeping a lot of data around that about how they feel about STEM fields before and after this, and the likelihood that they'll go on and maybe take part in a STEM field as a job in their future and go to college towards that. One other thing I want to talk about on these goggles is you can actually take a virtual tour of most of the larger college campuses on these. So we have student groups just like this saying, you know what, we're going to take you to Stanford today, and we're going to walk you around the campus. And so not only is there a STEM part of these, but there is also college and career. Our kids out here in rural Eastern Oregon, these types of kids, they hear about Stanford, they maybe see them on TV playing football or whatever, but you can actually take them to the campus, and you can even take them into different areas. Like there's some areas where they'll let you go into a Stanford research lab, and you'll see what the scientists are doing there. It's just really neat stuff. Another thing I'd like to show you real quick, this is called Z-Space. Again, we haven't used the program funding up yet, but locally we've been able to purchase a classroom set of these. And this is, again, more virtual reality, and you have a student here that is controlling a little stylus in his hand that looks like a pen. And that's what he looks like, but he's got 3D goggles on, and the TV screen up here, you can see that he's actually got a heart, and he's holding his hand out there, and you can see how it's actually pulled away from the TV screen. That heart, when it's animated and he's looking at it, is still beating. He can take a scalpel, he can dissect it, he can look at all the different layers of it inside and out. There is a camera that you can put up inside of the different arteries, and you can see, you basically can go up inside that heart, or you can take it apart either way. And so, to give you guys an idea, and I hope this works, I got a little 15-second video of an instructor that was doing the instructor training that we offered on this. And it is of a dinosaur, it's not of a heart, but it's going to give you guys an idea, I hope, of what it really looks like. Okay, so if you can imagine that was a heart there and the kid can turn it, that's the type of view that a kid is seeing. And actually, I know it's a dinosaur, but if you took that dinosaur and you pulled it back towards you with your stylus, you would actually end up inside the dinosaur's abdomen, and you'd be looking right at the heart or right at the lungs and that kind of stuff. So it's really, really neat stuff. Another thing that we're doing here is the robotics. These are the teachers doing the robotics, and we're introducing them to Lego robotics initially, and we want to roll out the VEX robotics, which is a little bit more complicated here in the next couple of years. But it's going to lead those kids into more kids entering in automated control systems, computer networking, that type of stuff. You can see there's about 12 teachers. I think there was actually 15 teachers in this. This is a Saturday. They're not getting paid. They just showed up because of some of the work that Nikki and our STEM Hub has been doing, building relationships, bringing very interesting topics in the area of STEM to teachers and making them aware of them. It's generating a lot of interest, and teachers are willing to go out of their way to participate in those. She had 2 Saturday sessions that had about 15 people in there. And back here on December 9th, we had another session where we did the Z-Space training. That was a snow day for everybody. School was completely canceled, and they still showed up. They didn't have to. And so I think that is a testament to the interest level, the engagement, everything that we're generating out here. Last one, this is the Health Science Day that we just finished up. It was just a week or so ago. This was in partnership with Treasure Valley Community College, Oregon State University Extension Office, and they ran 340 7th grade students at the college through, I think there were 8 different workstations. This happened to be a Cheek Cell one, but there was Z-Space was in there. We had an IV drip station so you could see what you do in nursing. And again, we're trying to promote these kids. We talked to them about what Treasure Valley Tech's about. We talked to them about the welding. We talked about the computer networking, the automated control systems, the allied health with the CNA. We're trying to generate interest in our younger kids into what we're doing at the high school levels. And where has it gotten us? So this data right here it's pretty self-explanatory. But this is our county graduation rate. So if I take all 7 high schools that we have here and I do a weighted average, I mean, this is not skewing it in any way. This is just the total number that graduated divided by the total number that didn't. And we're getting, you could see what's happening over the last 4 years. We went from 64% all the way to 85% with our all students. Hispanic students, not a lot of people realize this, but in our schools we actually have a Hispanic majority. We have 48% Hispanic students in schools versus 44% of Caucasian students. And so having a very high Hispanic graduation rate not only helps them out, it helps our overall out, and you can see what it's done to the achievement gap. It's almost none. It's only 1%. And again, we just became a STEM hub, so this is what we've been able to do with Treasure Valley Tech in the high schools. I really believe, and the data's starting to come out now for this past year's graduation rate, that this is going to plateau. I think we're going to have, hover right around 85, 86, 87%. And the reason is because we focus so much on graduation rates being a high school thing. We lose kids in middle school. And with what we're doing right now, focusing our STEM work in grades K through 8, and introducing those kids at a younger age to what they have to look forward to at high school, once those kids start coming up in the system, then I think we're going to see another spike in our graduation rate. And so, you talked about data. This is solid data. This is not hiding kids in alt schools. I know that's kind of a little technique that some high schools do, is you put all your kids in an alt school and it's a different number and all that. That is not the case. We do not do that over here, and this is every kid in the county. So it is pretty solid data, and it's something we're really proud of. That was it. I think we're doing good things. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a STEM hub, and I'll just open it up for questions.
Any questions from the council members?
Hi, Mark. This is Herb. Are you working with any of the local tribes?
Herb, we don't have any here in our county.
Okay. Burns is is Burns outside of your county?
Yes, Burns is part of the GoSTEM hub.
Oh, which one?
They're in GoSTEM.
Oh, Go.
Greater Oregon STEM hub.
Any other questions? Well, obviously, very impressive results here, and another testament to hands-on learning for children and getting them engaged in the sciences. And this is the testament of what I think we could see on the whole state level as more and more kids get exposed to applied learning and engagement in doing things that are really cool. Those goggles look like they're a lot of fun, and it's the future of how things are going to be presented to kids, which is pretty exciting. You're at the cutting edge. So very cool work.
We're very lucky. Thank you. We have a really, really good STEM coordinator, so we're very lucky in that. And like I said, she's started. That's what you're seeing in 5 months right there, and we look forward to the future. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I would urge, and we've asked all the STEM hubs to reach out to your legislators in your district, but having them see what you just presented would be another opportunity to tell the good stories of what these hubs are doing and the results we're getting. So if you have a chance to connect to your legislators out there, it's a great presentation to show them, and maybe pull them into one of your classrooms so they can play with the heart.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We will.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, we're opening it now for public comment. Mark, do you want to try to manage public comment from your side if we have any?
I have not received any requests for public comment. If people have some public comments, please be reminded that you're limited to 3 minutes, but send me well, we'll just keep it open and see if anybody wants to provide that testimony at this time.
Does anyone on the call want to make a comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public comment period. Actually, I thought this worked really well today. I thought the panel worked well. It'd be nice to have more people on video, but even without the video, I thought it was very effective. Appreciate the council members for kind of logging in and getting involved on this, and I thought it was a good meeting. I thought the panel discussion was excellent. Obviously, the work that mapped in real life and the Frontier STEM Hub was excellent results. I want to just thank the council for a really highly successful year. We've got a lot done. I really want to recognize Mark for his leadership. He gets a lot done behind the scenes that we're not aware of, and continues to have the dialogue and continues to work with the hubs to get the kind of successes we just heard about. We've accomplished a lot last year, grants out, funding going, success stories being told. Obviously, this is just 1 year, and obviously much more ahead of us with Measure 98 funding and some of the things we can do and need to continue to do at the middle school. A great opportunity to improve the overall outcomes for our kids. So I just want to thank the council members for engaging, be a part of this, and obviously best wishes to the holidays, and we have a big work plan ahead of us next year, so take a pause during the holidays, and we'll see you on the other side as we take some of this charges.
And Jim, I just want to add also a great big thank you to the Department of Education, Laura and her team, and Salam for the tremendous support that they've provided to the grantees and the coordination with the Chief Ed Office as well. Also, you know, the real work that's being done by our STEM hubs, many of whom are represented on this call, that's where the real work is happening at the local level. Really making a difference for kids. So kudos to all of them, and I just wish that everyone was able to see all of the fantastic work happening really across the state, and not just limited to the STEM hubs, but in our post-secondary environments as well. It's just fabulous to see Oregon starting to accelerate that change. So happy holidays from me as well to all of you.
Likewise. With that,
thank you.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Okay, everyone. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Have a great holiday and have a safe holiday.